Wow. Okay, so I know last time I mentioned that the last question for the pre-submitted questions came in like at the last minute with 3 seconds to spare. The final question that I will answer in the patron and member questions portion of the show tonight, which will begin momentarily. 3 seconds to go. I was looking at the clock because as soon as the clock clicks over to 6 p.m. Eastern my time, I click that little switch on the form, on the Google form that says no longer accepting responses, and I move that form into the archive folder, and that's it. That's no more questions for this live stream. 5:59 and 57 seconds p.m. Eastern time. A question shows up. That, I believe, is a record. That is a record. So anyway, hi everybody. Sorry, I'm a little late. I know I see people griping and belly aching in the chat. I'm here, and I'm about to get started with the patron and member questions, which is the first portion of the show, as always. So if you are with us in the live chat and you have something that you want to talk to me about, a question you want to ask me, or just something you want to tell me, or if we were planning on being generous and throwing in a super chat or something like that, if possible, please hold on to that until I get through the patron and member questions, and then I will turn my full attention for the rest of the show to the live chat. So, thank you, Isaiah. Isaiah says no rush. So there you go. So I'm just, you know what? I'll be back in about 20 minutes. Like, no, I'm not. I'm just playing around. Anyway. Let's get started with the patron and member questions, shall we? The first one of those comes from Stony, who says, in refutation to knuckleheads who think that women are incapable of getting heady sci-fi, who would you prefer to cite as the perfect foil to that simple-mindedness? Octavia Butler, Ursula K. Le Guin, or some third option? I lean towards Le Guin because of the huge influence on other authors, but the groundbreaking work of Butler can't be ignored either. So I will turn this one over to the live chat if anybody has any suggestions. I have read exactly one Octavia Butler short story. I have read, I think, 2 Ursula Le Guin short stories, plus The Dispossessed, and that is the extent of my familiarity with her work. On the basis of just those meager samplings alone, I would lean toward Le Guin because I think she is, stylistically, she is just an incredibly talented writer. I mean, not that Butler isn't, but the Octavia Butler story I read was extremely well written. Ursula K. Le Guin is, to me, is the superior writer. Again, based on an extremely limited sample size. But my knowledge of either writer is extremely limited. My knowledge of science fiction writers in general is extremely limited. So I am not the person to ask about this. But given the 2 options, I would lean toward Ursula K. Le Guin for whatever that's worth, which isn't much. Thank you for the question. Jim Luck Pickkirk. So I see that they might bring Picard back again. I have to preface this by saying I really like Patrick Stewart, and Picard is one of my favorite fictional characters, but my God, could we please let this character rest? It's because I love him so much that I'm saying that. He's already had 3, count them, 3 send-offs, and frankly, it's never been done better than it was the first time in 1994. All Good Things is one of the all-time great series finales, and it's frustrating that we keep bringing this character back after giving him such a perfect ending. I feel like Trek should explore strange new ideas and go boldly where it hasn't gone before. Can't quite put my finger on where I'm pulling that from, but it's almost like it could be some kind of mission statement, right? Sorry, just had to vent. And since I know I'm likely preaching to the choir with you on this, I guess my question is there anything they could do with this at this point that could interest you in it? No! I agree with everything you just said. I love Patrick Stewart as an actor and as a person. He seems like a really good dude. He seems like someone who has used his celebrity and his platform to try and do good in the world. He speaks out against domestic violence. He speaks out in favor of animal rights, and in general, in support of equality and humanism and humanitarianism. He just seems like a good dude who has used what he has been given for a good purpose, and he's a fantastic actor. And Picard as a character is a great character. One of the great characters in Star Trek, one of the great characters on television in the 1990s. And yes, it's because I love that character and love that actor so much that I wish they would just let it rest. Just put it down, do something else. The Star Trek franchise has a model that I wish it would go back to following for how to expand and grow and continue to make new stuff under the Star Trek umbrella, which is just do what they did with TNG and not do more TNG. That it seems like the message that the producers, the studio, the creators have gotten in their heads that they can't get out of is, oh, we'll just do more TNG, meaning we'll bring back the same actors and the same characters and we'll just keep doing more TNG stuff. And no, do your own original version of what TNG did, which was to take a completely new ship and a completely new cast of characters, none of whom we had ever met before, none of whom were the children or the siblings or the cousins or the long lost whatever of any established characters. They were the only link to Star Trek, the original series, to TNG when it started was that the ship was also named the Enterprise. It was a completely different ship, but it was also named the Enterprise. That was it. Everybody else was brand new. And that's what they should do for a new Star Trek series. And I would love it if it wasn't even an Enterprise. I would love it if it was another new ship like Voyager, even though I don't think Voyager turned out all that great. But like Voyager, like Discovery, a new ship with all new people, and it's all new stories. It's not going back and revisiting shit from the older shows. It's not checking in on planets or species or characters from TNG or Deep Space Nine or Voyager or wherever. It's new stories, new characters, new ship, strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations. Boldly go, do something different. Do what TNG did, but do your own original version of. That's what I would love to see. I am dying for a Star Trek show like that. The closest we've gotten to something like that is probably, other than Discovery. I mean, Discovery was pretty much that, except they had to tie it to classic Trek by having Burnham be Spock's sister and having Sarek come in, and then having Captain Pike come in. Like, there was a lot, even though the main cast and the sort of center of the show was original, except for the Burnham connection to Spock, it had all these little connections to classic Trek that I feel like it could have done without, even though that did give us Anson Mount's version of Captain Pike and Ethan Peck's version of Spock and Rebecca Romijn's version of Number One, which formed the core of Strange New Worlds, which now, ironically enough, after I've just got done saying all this, is the best new Star Trek show, is the best Star Trek show since Deep Space Nine went off the air. So, I mean, there are exceptions to what I'm saying, but if it were up to me, like, Strange New Worlds is you want Strange New Worlds to be the legacy character show, let Strange New Worlds be the legacy character show. It has a bunch of legacy characters in it, but they've been reinterpreted and reinvented. They're played by new actors. And, the show has its own spin on classic characters, which is preferable to, just deliberately trying to do the same thing that has already been done again. So let that stand for as long as it continues to run as the sort of nostalgia show, and do a new show that is all new people and all new ships and all new everything. Just like TNG was, just like, for better or worse, Voyager was and Deep Space Nine were when they started, where there was a little bit of a handoff in the beginning, where Captain Picard was in the first episode of Deep Space Nine and they brought O'Brien over, because O'Brien was kind of hanging around on TNG. So they brought him over to give him something to do and build him out and flesh him out as a major character. And with Voyager, they had the handoff on Deep Space Nine, where you see Deep Space Nine, you see Quark, and then the ship goes off and does its own thing in a completely different section of the galaxy. And like I said, Voyager, not such a great show overall, it turns out, but the idea of setting it in a different setting and centering it around different characters, like, that's a good idea. That's the sort of thing they should be doing more often. So yeah, no, I have no interest in another Picard show or another Picard movie or a legacy show where it's, the non-Picard characters of Picard season 3, like the Captain 7 adventures on the Enterprise G as show run by Terry Matalas. I have absolutely no interest in seeing that at all. Give me something new. Give me something new. Introduce me to some new people. Pixel Boy, greetings, Steve. As a longtime watcher of your channel, I decided to become a Patreon supporter because I came up with a long list of questions for your Ask Away show that cover a variety of subjects. So you can expect me to submit questions throughout 2024. Well, cool. Thank you very much. For my first question, let's do something light and fun. Select the one you prefer the most among the following: a reimagining of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea set in today's geopolitics, a next-generation continuation of Buffy the Vampire Slayer named Cherry the Vampire Slayer with a new cast of characters, a fictional movie about the realities of wrestling, something like the first Rocky movie with wrestling instead of boxing, a remake of the movie Armageddon, but this time it's more rooted in real science, like The Martian or The Expanse. If you pick number 3, you're in luck because a movie recently came out called The Iron Claw, which is a biographical movie about the Von Erich brothers. Thanks. Well, yeah, I would do the wrestling movie of those options, but I mean, and I haven't seen The Iron Claw, but of course I'm aware of The Iron Claw, and as soon as it's released on streaming somewhere, I intend to watch it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm curious to see, how good it is and what bits of the real true Von Erich story they choose to dramatize and how they do that. But yeah, I would love to do as you say in the question, a fictional movie about wrestling that would be something that we haven't seen already. Because there have been a few wrestling movies in the last 15 or 20 years or so that have gotten some attention. The big one, of course, was The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke, which was an excellent movie. Like, The Wrestler was terrific. I mean, it was directed by Darren Aronofsky, who was a brilliant filmmaker. And The Wrestler is a fantastic movie. But The Wrestler is about a guy who used to be a big wrestling star, and now he's, at the end of his journey, right? He's wrestling on the indies. He's old. He's injured. He's, facing a forced retirement due to health problems. And that's a very compelling story. And like I said, it's a great movie. And it's a great look at the harsh realities of the wrestling industry for people who are fans and are interested in that. And it's a great movie, whether you give a shit about wrestling or not. Like, it's just a good story, which is the most important thing. But I would really love to see a movie about a wrestler or a wrestling company, a wrestling promotion that depicts the industry, from a more kind of, prime of a wrestler's life kind of thing, like behind the scenes at a fictionalized version of a major wrestling company like WWE or something, and tell a story that is set in that environment as opposed to the indies where, it's either rookies trying to fight their way up or grizzled old broken down vets struggling to hold on to something on their way down. Again, great story, great potential there, but to do a movie set in the wrestling industry where it takes place when, where the characters are wrestlers who are at their peak, who are stars, who are still able to go, who are over with the crowd and are in the prime of their careers, and and dealing with life on the road and family and politics behind the scenes and blah blah blah, whatever you would end up making it about. That's what I would pick. Absolutely. Black Cover 95, I recently watched your video, The Israel-Hamas War, but it's just guys in a bar. I liked it, but I have a few notes. I thought the 2000s reality confession cam labels were kind of distracting. You should have had the respective parties' flags or logos on the shirts, or maybe caps. I think Palestinian civilians shirt should have had a few visible gunshot wounds after the shootings. It looked too comedic because they didn't actually seem to be hurt. Hamas should have grabbed PC and held them in front of him by force. Not sure how you do that with one actor, though. Do you own a mannequin? That and some strategic angles might do it. What do you think of my suggestions? Should I give feedback here in the future? I normally would put it in the comment section, but I did it this time for reasons too complicated to get into. If you want to use your question to give me feedback on videos, that's fine. I don't mind it. I will say in this case, all of your suggestions are either things I already thought of and decided not to do, or things that I couldn't have done given the schedule I was on and the resources I had available to do the video, which is basically me. Yeah, it's a little too complicated in terms of special effects to when both characters are portrayed by me to have one character grab another and force them to sit down. That's why I did it where the Hamas character is forcing the Palestinian civilians character to get in front of him at gunpoint. Like instead of grabbing him, he's just pointing a gun at him and saying, "Get over here." So there is a threat. There is a compulsory element to it, but it's not like he's physically manhandling him, because that just wasn't feasible for me to do, in terms of the production. And my first idea to differentiate, my concept was always that all of the characters would be identical and they would all just be me. But my original idea to differentiate them from each other so you would know who was to have flags either on their shirts or on hats that I would wear. And I realized that the flags would either have to be so huge that they would be comical and maybe distracting, or they would be so small that I was afraid they wouldn't read, that the audience wouldn't be able to immediately tell who was who and what each flag represented. So I ended up not doing that and going with the labels for everybody instead. And I personally, I understand you if you associate it with the real world and people's names being drawn on the screen and pointing at them. If you found it distracting, that's fair enough. That's your own reaction to the video. I think that works pretty well, and I like how that turned out. But no, I did consider doing flags to identify which country each person represented, but I was afraid that that would not be immediately apparent enough to a viewer of a video, especially if somebody happened to be watching it on a smaller screen. I wanted people who watched it to be able to tell immediately because everybody looks exactly like me. When I cut to a shot, I need them to know exactly who they're looking at and exactly who is talking, or else it won't make any sense and it won't read and the jokes won't land and the satire won't make sense. You have to know exactly who it is. And if you don't know what the Hamas flag looks like, or you don't know, whatever, if you don't know the South African flag at a moment's glance, then that's not going to make any sense to you. So that's why I went with the labels. But thank you very much for the suggestions. They are good suggestions. And like I said, if you choose to use your question to give me feedback on a video in the future, that's completely fine with me. Thomas Kent, what was it that caused Earth Final Conflict to self-destruct? I have no idea. I've never watched the show. I've never been interested in the show. I know nothing about the show, other than I think it was based on something that Gene Roddenberry jotted down on the back of a napkin at some point. So I honestly don't know and can't answer that question. But thank you very much for asking it, and I apologize for not having a better answer. Matthew Gretzinger. Hi, Steve. I loved your recent "Why Does Superman Need to Save the Cat" video essay. It got me thinking about the other essays you've posted in the Best Superman Ever series, which I also love. My question is more or less about where the Christopher Reeve version of the character falls in your estimation. Will his Superman ever rate a Best Superman Ever video? In some of the other videos, you comment on his performance positively, referencing his self-description as a friend in one, but I can't find an essay that yields a definitive judgment on his portrayal. Are you not planning to do such a video? If not, why not? In the Siegel and Schuster video, you identified Superman's role as a social justice warrior and one of the defining elements of your favorite Superman. Does Reeves' version lack that element? Does that subtract from his appeal for you? If you are planning such a video, yay! What might you say in it? Thanks in advance, and thanks for all the great content. In terms of on-screen Supermans, Christopher Reeve is top of my list. I love Christopher Reeve's Superman. Christopher Reeve's performance as Superman embodies that character to me. He is everything that I think Superman should be. And I adore Christopher Reeve's Superman. It's funny, like the most social justice-y elements of the Christopher Reeve Superman that we get are probably in Superman 4 when he tries his hand at nuclear disarmament, which is the worst movie, but is the best idea for a movie. Like, I love the concept of Superman trying with all good intentions to involve himself in a extremely urgent global social issue, global political issue, like just issue that could not be of greater importance, and realizing, once he gets involved, that it's a lot more complicated than he thought it would be, and that his well-intentioned interference might actually end up making things worse, or at the very least won't make things better. I think there's potential there for a fantastic Superman story, but Superman 4 is not it, but that's probably the most like politically tinged story of the Christopher Reeve Superman film series. But even with that element missing, Christopher Reeve's Superman stories, Superman movies, and his performance specifically is absolutely, top of the ladder for me. Like, I love his Superman. The concept of Superman as a friend, the concept of Superman as a deep down, decent guy who just wants to help, who just wants to use his power to make things better for people, to help people, to save people who need saving, to right wrongs that he can right, to rescue people from, natural disasters and stop supervillains from hurting people. And like that to me is Superman. That's the essence of Superman. He's a guy with superpowers who wants to help. And that's Christopher Reeve's Superman. And the fact that he is charismatic and charming and looks the part still to this day more than any actor who's ever played Superman, that's just the icing on the cake. It's the heart and the humanity of the performance that really makes it. And the other stuff, the fact that, he's physically a perfect match, and he's great at comedy. He has great comic timing. He can come across as very genuine and very earnest, and yet doesn't seem corny or cloying or mawkish. Like, that's another crucial element. He needs to be able to project sincerity without seeming like a goody two shoes, and that's Christopher Reeve's Superman. He's the greatest. He's the greatest on-screen Superman. And the other great on-screen Supermans that have come after him, because George Reeves came before him, and George Reeves is also a fantastic on-screen Superman, in different ways than Christopher Reeve was. But George Reeves was brilliant, and I love George Reeves. But all the good ones that have come after Christopher Reeve have either attempted to do their version of what he did, and I would put Brandon Routh and Tyler Hoechlin in that category. And Tyler Hoechlin is further away from Christopher Reeve than Brandon Routh was. Brandon Routh, by design, was very much in the Christopher Reeve mold, and Brandon Routh, again, I thought was a great Superman. Tyler Hoechlin is doing his own version of the same kind of thing Christopher Reeve did, but in a different way. So you don't really necessarily think, oh, just like Christopher Reeve when you watch him on Superman and Lois, but he's trying to evoke the same feelings and create a character built around the same concepts that Christopher Reeve did. And then Dean Cain on Lois and Clark became a great Superman by going in the opposite direction, by embracing elements that Christopher Reeve's Superman didn't really get around to or didn't really involve himself with. Dean Cain's Superman was much more relatable and much more of an everyman, was much, his interpretation was much more Clark centered, which was in line with the popular comic book presentation of Superman during the 90s, which was, it was the John Byrne post-crisis Superman, where he's Clark before he's Superman. The real guy is Clark. Clark Kent is who he really is, and Superman is the persona that Clark adopts, to be his superhero guise when he goes out and does good as Superman. But the real guy is Clark, and that was what Dean Cain was doing. And again, Dean Cain as a human being is a piece of garbage and a Trump-supporting asshole. But as Superman on Lois and Clark, he was terrific. And it was very much an attempt to not do what Christopher Reeve did. So even the ones that aren't like Christopher Reeve but are good are in some ways a response to Christopher Reeve's Superman. So he's the definitive Superman. Everyone that has come after him and played that role has had to reckon with him in some way. And yeah, he's fantastic. The Dark Knigget returns, a.k.a. Brian McKinley. Hi, Steve. Here's a video idea, cleverly disguised as a question. Would you consider getting together with Jesse Gender to do a great debate on Lower Decks? I love watching both of your reviews, but you have some wildly divergent opinions on that show that I would love to see you square off. Well, I would not do a debate because I think it's silly to debate a preference. And neither one of us is right. Like, I don't think Lower Decks is a very good show. I don't enjoy it. Jesse does. Neither one of us is right or wrong. That's a difference of opinion. That's a matter of taste. So I wouldn't want to approach it as a debate, and I don't think she would either. But I would love to do a video where we talk about it. Yeah, I think we've mentioned it once or twice. And we did a live stream together a few years ago where we talked about it a little. I don't think I think we maybe talked about Lower Decks some. But we talked a little bit about areas where we diverge, where we don't necessarily agree. And I would love to do that again with Jessie, because I think Jessie is brilliant and great, and I love her stuff, and I love her videos. And I think she just as a person is fantastic. So I would do a video with Jessie Gender anytime she wanted. And yeah, I think it would be great fun to get together with Jessie and do a video where we talk about Lower Decks, and we sort of have a good-natured conversation / argument about our differing views on the show and why we feel the way we do. But no, not a debate. Just a conversation between friends about something that we have differing takes on, and hopefully talking about it with each other would be fun. But yeah, I would totally do that. Brian Baker, Steve, a quick note on Monday's debacle in Iowa. The majority of the responders in exit polls said immigration was their biggest concern, not the economy, the wars, or anything else. I am from Iowa originally and know that the system of caucusing is very complicated and that Iowa voters do not represent the views of the majority of the United States. What do you think will happen in future primaries on the Republican side? Will Trump continue to dominate the party? And how can the Democrats form the issue so that a majority of the people understand that it is the fault of the two parties refusing to do their jobs, rather than the lies that Republicans continue to tell that it is all the Democrats' fault? Here's hoping that we don't get fooled again. Personally, I think Trump's domination of the Republican Party will disintegrate as soon as Trump himself is no longer a factor. Whether he dies or he goes to prison or he just loses this upcoming election and decides to leave politics, I feel like as soon as Trump himself is no longer an active figure in the party, his and his supporters' hold over the party will vanish very fast, because there are a lot of prominent people in the Republican Party who would love to go back to the way they were doing things before, where they're pretending to be decent, respectable people. And they would love to put that mask that they wore for so many decades back on, if at all possible. Because they'll continue to push for the same policies. They'll continue to be the same horrible party that they've always been, but they would love to regain that veneer of respectability that was ripped away by Trump and by the ascension of his supporters. So if they can get back to that, I think they will do that very quickly. It won't mean that the party itself will get any better, but it will try to pretend that it's better and try to pretend that it's more, worthy of respect. Yeah, and how can Democrats form the issue so that a majority of people understand? I mean, Democrats need to tell their story. And Democrats in the last several election cycles, at least, if not longer, have been terrible at telling the American voting public their story, and why, if you are anybody in the United States other than an ultra wealthy sociopath who does not care about anyone else other than yourself and your money, you should vote for the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party, even as overly moderate and overly centrist as it is, even as timid as it is when it comes to pushing for real substantial reforms, it is better than the Republican Party on every single issue. And there is no reason why anyone, again, other than the group I just mentioned would even consider voting Republican. And most especially if you are a middle class person, a working class person, a person struggling with debt, a person struggling with healthcare bills, a person struggling with student loan payments, a person who is living in poverty or on the cusp of poverty, trying to avoid falling into it, whatever economic or social group you happen to fall in, if you are not among the most ultra privileged in the country, and also you are not completely indifferent to the plight of people who are in need in the country, you should vote Democrat. Like, it's not a close choice. And that's not me saying that the Democratic Party is perfect and that everything they want to do is great and they don't need to change anything. Of course they do, and I wish they would in a lot of ways. But compared to the Republicans, it's not even fucking close. It's not even fucking close. And the Democrats need to tell that story and tell it in a way that doesn't exclusively center Trump, because they've gotten good at centering Trump and saying, if you don't want 4 more years of Trump, vote for us. That's great. And I agree they should be doing that. But for whatever reason, that message doesn't resonate with everybody. Right? And especially if someone is maybe in one of those really dire situations where they feel like, well, their specific situation won't substantially improve, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. So what difference does it make for them? They don't care about the Trump stuff. They're at the point in their life where things are so bad for them or for people they care about that they honestly don't think it makes a difference. Now, they're wrong. It might not make a difference specifically for them in the short term, but it does make a difference for the country as a whole. So they're wrong that it doesn't make a difference, but, you know, they've gotten to the point where they don't give a fuck. They're worried about them and their situation, and they want to improve their situation, and understandably so. And they fear that the Democrats won't be any better for them than the Republicans, and they probably have past experience to inform that, unfortunately. So the Democrats need to reach to those people as well by telling the story in a broader way. Don't act like Trump isn't there. Don't act like Trump doesn't exist, or that it's not absolutely fucking crucial that we defeat Trump in the next election. They need to tell that story, but they need to tell other parts of the story as well. They need to sell themselves as a party of the working class. And then they need to back that up by actually trying to fix things. You know, they need to sell themselves as the party of healthcare, as the party of education, as the party of infrastructure, as the party that should be trusted with the stewardship of the economy more than Republicans, as the party that should be trusted with the stewardship of the environment more than the Republicans. You know, they need to tell their story and sell themselves across a broad spectrum to people, and not in a way that they're trying to flip Republicans, in a way that they're trying to get progressives and liberals and people who are already ideologically on their side to convince those people to get off their asses and go vote for them, because they're terrible at that too. But that's what the Democrats need to do. That's what the Democrats need to do. They need to activate the potential voter base that is already there, that either doesn't care or thinks the Democrats can't be trusted or can't be counted on, or that it doesn't make a difference. They need to talk to those people and stop focusing so exclusively on Trump and stop trying to flip Republicans, because that's a waste of fucking time. Ben Douglas. Hi, Steve. In my opinion, one of the biggest perks of living in the U.S. in the modern day is the wide availability and relative affordability of cuisines from around the world. Chinese, Mexican, and Italian are obviously fairly pervasive, albeit typically tailored to the American palate. More obscure food is generally not that hard to come by, though. For example, if you haven't had the Turkish manti or Palestinian kunafa, you're really missing out. My question to you is, are there any less prominent world cuisines that you're a fan of? Tying it to Star Trek, which alien races do you think would have the best food? I personally have wanted to try Bajoran Hasperat for the past 30 years. If it helps head off a potential Trek aliens aren't real, so therefore don't have food, you can think of it as part of a bit for the Ensign's Log, the excellent Star Trek-themed improv comedy podcast you do alongside Jay Zarding and Dana Cole. Thank you for the plug for our podcast. And thank you for anticipating the reason why I would not be as gung-ho to answer your question as I otherwise might be. As far as real-world cuisine, Hagerstown and the Hagerstown area actually has a lot more ethnically diverse culinary offerings than it used to have. But there's still not a lot of super exotic stuff around here. But there are some really good Thai restaurants that I enjoy from time to time, and a really good Korean place not too far from here that I order from every once in a while. So, yeah, it's more than just, Chinese food and sushi. Like there is some other sort of Asian cuisine, in the area that I partake of every once in a while. And yeah, we have decent Mexican restaurants and decent Italian restaurants, and also some excellent German restaurants in the area, which can also be quite tasty if you're in the mood for that. And you have budgeted calorically. If you are mindful of your food intake, and you're going to order something from the German restaurant, many of the dishes are quite calorically intense, but yeah, there's some good international cuisine around here that I've enjoyed. And as for Star Trek, I mean, I hate to piggyback on what you already said, but the only one of the established races that I can think of where we have gotten like a hint of what their food is like, the Bajarans are the only one where it seems like I might like it. Because the Bajarans, it seems like real food. Like Hasperat, even though we don't really know much about it, just the way that characters talk about it, the way it's presented in the show, it feels like a real thing. It feels like real food. Klingon food to me always comes across as a joke. Which I like. Like I've said many times, I think the best way to present Klingon stuff in Star Trek is to treat it as a joke and to make it as outrageous and outlandish as you can think of to make it. Because that to me is part of the nature of Klingons, is that they're over the top. So, I mean, it's nothing I would ever want to eat. I don't want to eat fucking a plate of live worms, right? Or something called blood pie. That doesn't sound very appetizing. Maybe if you're a fan of blood pudding, you might enjoy it, but I don't, happen to favor that. But, so no, of the Bajaran cuisine, what little we've gotten an impression of it, seems like the one I would be most interested in trying. Although, as far as Klingon food, I do love a nice, strong cup of black coffee. So I would be interested if Raktajino was actually a thing, I would be interested to try it. Because yeah, I do love a nice strong cup of coffee. David Colby, currently deep inside the neutral zone on a deadly mission against the Romulan Star Empire. Well, I hope that you submitted that question through some kind of encryption. Otherwise, you're screwed. There's some Romulan agent with a samurai sword coming to kill you at this very moment. Wackiest changes you'd make to Star Trek just to piss off fans. Mine are, I'd have Romulans and Vulcans live on the same planet still. Romulus is just a continent. They still have a star empire. It's just all the colonies they colonize while still having their capital on Vulcan. The neutral zone is this 5-mile stretch between the rest of Vulcan and the Romulan Peninsula. And we keep the same thing where people aren't sure what Romulans look like. Why? Fuck you, that's why. The Vulcan solar system is the most militarized place in the Alpha Quadrant. The whole place is full of WMDs aimed at both sides, and if war starts with the Romulan Empire, then the entire place is going to explode. The next change I'd make, just for fun, I'd have Sisko back running a restaurant on Bajor and never explain it. Not only does he not explain it, no one even asks. Every character just acts like it's normal. Also, I'd have Federation ships that don't even use saucers or nacelles just to annoy people. I like all of those. I love the idea of coming up with ideas to put in Star Trek shows just to piss off the hardcore fans. I love that. I love that so much because there are so many Star Trek fans who take it way too fucking seriously, who are way too attached to the lore for its own sake, and care nothing about the story or the characters. And they're entitled to that, whatever. If that's what makes them happy, via con Dios. But I would take great pleasure in poking at them. Because I don't think that is the fan base that ought to be paid attention to if your priority is making a good show. So yeah, I like all of those suggestions. Your suggestion with Sisko reminds me of, and I think we've talked about it on this stream before and it's come up a few times. People have asked, what if they did do a follow-up series to Deep Space Nine? Like Picard was to TNG? What if they did a revisiting or a reprise of Deep Space Nine? Like, how would you, and Avery Brooks agreed to come back for it. And how would you write Sisko's return from the wormhole? And my idea was he's been back for 20 years. It's been a long time. Like, Deep Space Nine went off the air a long time ago. A lot of time has passed for us, and because of the ages of the actors, a lot of time will have to have passed for the characters as well. So Sisko came back a long time ago, and he's doing whatever he's doing, in or out of Starfleet. I don't know. Like, he's running a restaurant on Bajor. He's just back. He's there. It happened so long ago that nobody really even asks about it anymore. It was probably a big deal at the time, but that was a while ago. We're not worried about that. Forget about that. What's this show about? That I would love to do, not only because that would piss off fans, certain fans, the fans I wouldn't mind pissing off, but also it's the best thing to do for the show. Like, the best thing to do for a show like that is just not to make it. But if you have to make it, or you insist on making it, and you have to say, like, okay, what's Sisko doing now? 25 years after the end of Deep Space Nine. The best thing to do is say, okay, it's been 25 years. Let's just do something else. Let's start with Sisko in a different place, and let's move forward from there. Right? That's what I would do. So it has the benefit of irritating the overly attached canon nerds, and it also has the benefit of being the right creative starting point for such a series, if indeed it must be made, which I pray that it never is. Yeah, and also, like, my favorite thing to fantasize about, as far as like doing things to piss off the nerds, is to just throw things in, just to throw offhand references in that muddy the waters as to what timeline the show is set in. Because again, there are entirely too many fans in the fan base, and fans in the fan base that have entirely too much of a share of the conversation in terms of the discourse, that just care way too much about that. So I would put references, little throwaway lines or gags or, whatever into the show that would suggest that, maybe it takes place in the Kelvin timeline. Maybe it's Prime timeline. You know what I mean? Maybe it takes place in an earlier time period than we thought, and we weren't sure because the uniforms are different, but the uniforms are always different, so you can't always tell by the uniforms. Like, I would do stuff like that just to throw people off, not in a way that affected the actual story I was telling, which would always be my number one priority, but just little things here and there to catch people's attention if they were looking for that sort of thing, if they were paying attention to that, and make them go like, "Ugh!" I would take great joy in that. Agent Meister, who's like the stagecoach in Rio Bravo, talked about but never seen. Peldor Joy, Steve. Talk me off the ledge here, big guy. I've been reading the tea leaves based on reports I've been hearing on my side of the Atlantic, and I've concluded, depressingly, that November's election will be Trump's to lose. Biden's poll numbers seem to be going through the floor, and his VP isn't faring much better either. Despite having 90-plus criminal charges hanging over his head, death seems to be the only way of stopping Trump from taking the White House again. Is there any hope that your compatriots will put, as you described it, decency over what this braying jackass and his creatures has to offer? Living in Ireland, the result will make little or no difference to me, in the immediate future at least, but it saddens me that this is the best that's on offer. The U.S. is not perfect, but it can at times be good. And you guys deserve so much better than this. Maybe if Biden storms the Capitol in D.C., it might give the Democrats a shot in the arm. It hasn't done Trump any harm. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate your concern for my country and my fellow Americans and myself. I will just tell you the same thing that I always tell 255 AD, who also has recently been repeatedly voicing a lot of anxiety about the outcome of our election this year, which is we still have a long way to go. It's January. The election's in November. We just had our first votes in a primary election last week, or this past week. And that was in Iowa, and as was mentioned earlier, does not in any way represent anything close to the overall will of the nation. And also, that's just the Republican primary. There, for all intents and purposes, there will be no Democratic primary because Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee. And there are some people running against him, but they don't have a chance. It's going to be Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. He's going to, be, as the incumbent running for re-election, he's going to be the nominee. We still have a long way to go. So if I didn't think there was anything to worry about, I would not have made that video that I made about the demands of decency. I would not be doing my own small little part to try and advocate for Biden shifting his position on Gaza, because not only is that the human thing to do and the right thing to do, but it is also the politically smart thing to do, because the tolerance and enabling of Israel's campaign in Gaza, it's genocide, it's collective punishment, it's whatever you want to call it, that is seriously turning off a lot of people in the Democratic Party. It's upsetting voters and potential voters. It's upsetting members of Congress in the Democratic Party. It is really alienating or threatening to alienate a lot of people, some of whom we might need to win the election. So just for pure cold-blooded, calculating political purposes, I think it's very important for Biden to pivot on Israel and Gaza and to come out with a much harsher stance against Israel and to take our unconditional support off the table. And I hope he does that between now and November, because I think if he does that, that will greatly increase his chances of getting reelected. But even if he doesn't do that, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he loses and that Trump wins. Like I said, it's a long way to go. And I won't be able to say this if you ask me this question again in, the last week of October and the polls are still close or they show Trump still ahead, then I won't be able to say it's early yet. I'll have to come up with something else to reassure you. But right now in January, I can say, don't panic yet. Relax. We still have a long way to go. Danny K. Hey, Steve, the Houthi rebels in Yemen have been getting a lot of attention lately for their activities in the Red Sea, frustrating transport ships. They're currently being cheered on by a lot of online leftists who view this as an anti-West, anti-imperialism, anti-Israel victory. But from what I can gather, very few of these ships, if any, are involved in the Israeli trade or commerce or have any connection to Israel. And the Houthis don't exactly seem like they're on board with leftist causes themselves. I'm no fan of imperialism and find what Israel is doing in Gaza to be appalling on many levels, but seeing leftists back the Houthis is troubling. It feels to me to be an example of them falling prey to propaganda in the way we often see right-wingers trip over each other to do. What are your thoughts? Thanks. Hope all is well. Leftists prematurely throwing too much support behind a group just because that group doesn't like another group that leftists don't like? I've never heard of that. That can't possibly be what's happening. No, leftists are just as susceptible to propaganda and are just as susceptible to ideological blind spots as right-wingers are. As I have said before, and I made a whole video about this last year, I vastly prefer leftists and even, far extremist leftists, with the exception of tankies, to right-wing extremists, because for the most part, leftists want what I would consider a better world. Leftists are fighting for the right things. They aren't always fighting in what I would call the right way or the most productive way or the most practical way, but they are at least fighting for the right things, whereas right-wingers are fighting for horrifying things. But no, leftists are just as willing as right-wingers in certain cases to turn a blind eye to the flaws and the faults and the troubling aspects of people that they view as being on their side. You mentioned the Houthis, and that is an example. And Hamas is an example. There are so many leftists who who are unconditionally defending Hamas as an organization, not the Palestinian people who should be defended and should be stood up for and should be advocated for as much as possible, but Hamas. And I understand why they're doing it. And I even understand, in some cases, the point they're making, which is we should be concerned about why Hamas exists in the first place and what Israel has done to encourage and enable and drive the creation of Hamas and the continued support for and existence of Hamas. Like, those are all legitimate points. And those were also legitimate points when people made them about Al-Qaeda, after 9/11. That we need to take a look seriously at the role in which American foreign policy and American interventionism in these Middle Eastern countries led to the rise of Al-Qaeda. Like, we have a role and we have a responsibility in the existence of this group because it was a response to things that we are responsible for. But that doesn't mean that what Al-Qaeda did was right or was in any way defensible. And I think there's a metaphor or there's a parallel to be drawn there with Hamas. Yes, of course I understand why Hamas exists. Of course I understand why there would be people in the Palestinian territories or sympathetic with people in the Palestinian territories who would despise Israel and despise the people of Israel and be driven to use violence, in some cases incredibly over-the-top, horrific violence against unarmed civilians. Like, I understand emotionally and politically where that might come from. In no way does that justify many, many things that Hamas has done, including most recently the October the 7th attacks. That was an atrocity, and there's no excuse for that, and there's no defending that, and I'm not going to defend it, and it really bothers me that so many leftists are willing to defend it, or at the very least overlook it and pretend it didn't happen. But the other side of that is, it doesn't matter how awful Hamas is. It doesn't matter how bad they are. It doesn't matter if they are every bit as evil as the state of Israel says they are. That doesn't justify what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. Because they're not killing Hamas. They're killing Palestinians who had nothing to do with what happened on October 7th, who had nothing to do with anything that Hamas has ever done, other than maybe they're in the area of where Hamas operates. So you don't need to defend Hamas. You don't need to excuse Hamas. You don't need to explicitly side with Hamas and say, yeah, they're the good guys, in order to say that what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is utterly unexcusable, because it is. If there was some way that the state of Israel could say, okay, we're just going after Hamas, and they could just go after Hamas and everybody that they captured or killed was a member of Hamas, I honestly wouldn't have a problem with that. But clearly, when they say we're going after Hamas, they're just saying that as an excuse so they can bomb the shit out of entire cities filled with innocent civilians and destroy hospitals, or at least destroy the means that hospitals need to operate. Because that's always when you bring up the hospitals thing, the people on Israel's side will always come out and say, oh, that's exaggerated. It turned out they never actually bombed that hospital. They only bombed the area around the hospital, and the damage was caused by Hamas launching rockets and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. You don't bomb hospitals. You destroy the water supply and the electricity and the surrounding area so hospitals can't actually operate. How is that any better? Okay, you don't actually target specifically the hospitals, but you render it impossible for a hospital to do what it needs to do. But yeah, I am well aware of the problem of leftists siding with people that they shouldn't be siding with, just because, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend syndrome. And that can, cause some troubles. Let's just say. Keith Parker. Hey, Steve, I've been writing short stories in my spare time for a number of years now, and while I'm quite happy with my ability to develop characters and write dialogue, I find myself struggling with plot. Since you're such a good storyteller, would you provide some advice on how to develop a good, compelling plot? It would be wonderful if you could give me examples of such plot elements in a Star Trek episode. I really appreciate everything you do on your channel. You provide no end of fascinating, funny, and thought-provoking material. Take care. Peace. Well, A good plot feels like something that is naturally happening. A good plot doesn't feel like it's something that a writer came up with and then imposed on the characters. A good plot feels like, it doesn't feel like a plot. It feels like things that are happening as a result of a larger situation and how characters are dealing with that situation and choices that characters make that affect the course and the outcome of the story. That's a good plot. Let me think of an example for Star Trek. Well, actually, the episode of Classic Trek that I just reviewed yesterday, The Naked Time, is a decent example because, and I mentioned in my review, and I still have it fresh in my head, so I can use that as an example. So, The Naked Time, the starting premise, the reason that the Enterprise is coming to this particular planet is they have a personnel reason for being there and a scientific reason, right? And their personnel reason is they're swinging by to pick up a science team that has been stationed on this planet, and they need to pick them up now because the planet is disintegrating, and they need to get them before the planet disintegrates and they all die. And then they're supposed to hang around and stay close to the planet so they can monitor its disintegration for scientific purposes. So that's the reason why the ship and the characters are there. And then when they beam down to the planet, they discover a mystery. They discover that everything in the planets and the scientific base is frozen. All the environmental controls are broken, and all the scientists are dead. And while they're investigating it, they become infected by this mysterious infection that they picked up unknowingly from the surface that is what led to the deaths of the scientists, although they don't know that yet. And then when they get back to the Enterprise and this infection starts to spread among the crew, now you have a plot that is running on three parallel paths. And those three paths are, one, there's this infection spreading all over the ship and it's causing the crew to act funny. And there is some interest and suspense in just seeing how that plays out. Who's going to get it next? How are they going to act? What are they going to do? And we see that happening as it affects various characters. Then branching off of that is Dr. McCoy discovering what is going on and trying to find a cure for it, right? And then parallel to both of those is the situation where the Enterprise has been hanging around so close to the planet in order to manage the disintegration that they're caught in the planet's gravity and being pulled down into it. And if they can't escape in time, the ship will be pulled down with the disintegrating planet and the ship will be torn apart just like the rest of the planet will be. And they can't just fly away now because their systems have been compromised because one of their crew members affected by the strange space infection has damaged their systems and turned off their engines and locked them out from their navigation controls. And it's a really, really bad situation. So the plot unfolds across these three parallel lines that are not exactly parallel because, they're interconnected. They cross over each other and they affect each other, but they all emerge naturally from the situation. It's all stuff that happens as a result of going to this planet for a completely understandable, logical reason and getting involved in something beyond their control and beyond their understanding. And the plot is about trying to find that understanding in time to save themselves from the threat that they are, vulnerable to in large part because of they're, being affected by this mysterious ailment. So everything fits together, everything ties together. It all comes together at the end when, McCoy has found the cure and he cures Captain Kirk right as he comes on the bridge, and Spock and Scotty have come up with this, they've gotten into engineering and they've come up with this long shot plan to restart the engines and allow the ship to escape. And like all of the different plot lines converge in that, in those closing scenes, in a way that is very, satisfying. And it all comes from the situation and it all comes from character and it feels natural. It doesn't feel contrived. It doesn't feel like, oh, time for a plot twist, let's have this happen. It shouldn't feel that way. Even if that's what you're really doing. Like, even if you are writing a story and you get to a point where you're like, oh, gee, I'm so many pages into this. Like, if you're writing a screenplay for a movie, I mean, typical screenplay format is you're supposed to have a plot point every 30 pages or so, or at least you're supposed to have a plot point after 30 pages and then have another plot point after 60 pages, right? If you're going by traditional 3-act structure. So you might be writing your first draft of your screenplay and you get to page 30 and you're like, okay, time to have something happen. Like, even if that's your mode of thinking when you're writing it and you are contriving a plot, it shouldn't feel that way when people read the story or watch the story. It shouldn't feel like, oh, time for the plot point. It should feel as though it's emerging naturally from the situation and the characters. That's the most important thing. And then another thing to consider is what are you trying to say? Do you have a message you want to convey? Are there particular themes you want to explore? What is it about this story that makes you want to tell it? And what are you trying to say? What do you want to leave the audience with when they have finished your story? And sometimes you have that idea right away. You know that going in. Sometimes you won't know that until after you've written it, after you've written a first draft. And then you go back and read it and you realize, oh, that's what this is about. And then you can go back and rewrite with that in mind and strengthen that, or hone that, sand it down in places or bring it out more fully in other places. And how does the plot relate to that? And how can the plot be made to serve that in a way that still feels right and still feels natural? So, I mean, it gets really complicated and it's very, very flexible and dependent on what story you're trying to tell and what your intentions are and what your goals are with that story. But for me personally, the most important thing is that when the story is in its finished form and it's ready to be released out into the world, that plot should feel like something natural that is just happening in the lives of these characters for reasons that are perceptible and understandable to the audience. Easier said than done, but that's what I have to say. General Contact Unit Problem Child. Remember I said I don't understand what hope and optimism are? I meant every time someone tries to explain them to me, it sounds like just putting a positive spin on blind faith or self-delusion. Like, I Googled definitions, Dana's suggestion, and both included the idea of having confidence a particular thing will happen. To my thinking, that belief is either well-founded and you're just being realistic, or it's not and you're just deluding yourself. Make sense? 2, I've been rereading a novel series I like. The books are told from the main character's first-person perspective, recounting events from recounting events an old man. As an old man, I guess you meant to say there. In the first book, he accidentally gets 2 innocent men executed and says it's the most guilty he's ever felt. But in the second book, he outright murders someone, and for the rest of the series says that's the thing he feels the most guilty about. I know you make a point of not caring about continuity, but would you agree that it's kind of bad writing? Like, imagine if DS9 did In the Pale Moonlight twice. Well, first of all, for your first question, yes, that does make sense. I mean, I do think there is, a certain degree where things are out of your control. I mean, if you genuinely feel pessimistic about something, you can't just flip a switch and say, I will be confident about this. I will be hopeful about this. Like, that's not the way it works. I do think there are ways of framing it. There are ways of telling yourself a story about it. Not in a way, I'm not suggesting delude yourself or lie to yourself, but there are ways of kind of reorienting your thinking about a thing that can allow you to be more optimistic or hopeful about something. But you're right, it's not entirely in our control. And as for 2, I mean, I haven't read the books, so I can't speak to it from that perspective. Just based on what you said, though, I mean, it's the events are sequential, right? So if in the first book he says the greatest guilt is getting an innocent man executed, it's true in that book. And then in the second book, you could say he does something that he feels worse about. Like, he murdered the guy after he got the innocent man executed, right? So he just did something that he felt worse about. I don't see why that's a break in continuity or even why it's repetition. It's just, he does something after the first thing he feels bad about that he feels worse about. And from that point forward, he says, that's the thing I feel the worst about. So no, I mean, just based on that description, it doesn't jump out at me as necessarily being bad writing, not based on that. M.W. Ridra, months back, there was a thread on Reddit about T'Lyn from Lower Decks, and one response was someone saying they thought it'd be funny if LD did a Ponfar episode. This elicited a feeling of revulsion on my part, and I've been stewing over it off and on ever since. The more I think about it, the more I think I hate the concept of Ponfar altogether and never want to see it on Trek again. I looked around online and was surprised there wasn't much discourse on the problematicness of Ponfar. In general, I'm not a fan of any writing contrivance that denies one's agency in sex. It's always creepy. But also, there's a very noticeable difference in how Ponfar episodes treat men and women suffering from it. And some would hit very different if the genders were reversed. T'Pol was particularly egregious, rubbing all over Phlox and Malcolm in her sweaty underwear, begging to mate and getting violent when refused. Anyway, I vote that writers just forget the entire concept forever. Do you agree? Yes, the only good use of Ponfar ever in Star Trek was the first time, a mock time, and it should have been left there. It worked in a mock time because it was limited to Spock. There was very little detail about it. They didn't go into what are the ramifications of this for, do women go through Ponfar as well? Is Spock going to go through this every 7 years of his life? Or is this going to do him for, what I mean? Like and it was all just, the thing that the point people miss about Ponfar and a mock time was it was mostly just an excuse, talk about the building of plot, right? It was an excuse to get Kirk and Spock to fight. Like that was the ultimate purpose of Spock having Ponfar. It was creating a situation where within that situation, the most reasonable thing that would happen to resolve that situation based on the initial situation and the choices characters make and the conditions imposed on them from the outside, the most reasonable thing that would happen would be Spock and Kirk being forced to fight each other. And like fight each other for real, not like just, friends pretending to fight or whatever, or not like a friendly wrestling match, right? That was the whole function of Ponfar in a mock time. My favorite classic Star Trek episode. It's a plot device, and it's a really fun plot device. And yes, it does give you insight into Vulcans and the Vulcan people. If that's something that you were interested in, it's not something I'm particularly interested in, but the problem is every time they go back to it, they forget that it started out as a little bit of a gag. It wasn't necessarily played for laughs, but it was meant to build up to a fight between Kirk and Spock. Like that was the point. And when they revisited in Voyager and have B'Elanna get it, or no, they have Vorik get it, right? The other Vulcan, the Vulcan dude on the ship. Or in Enterprise, when T'Pol gets it, like, yeah, it's like the mirror universe. The more they reuse it, the further they get away from the original concept that made the whole thing work in the first place. The more they forget what it was and why it was interesting. And it just becomes, not only does it become watered down and boring, but it also, in the case of Ponfar, because of the sexuality, because of the implication that it turns people into animals and the unpleasant tropes that come into play, especially when women are involved. Like, oh, she's a horny woman. She's an animal. She can't control herself, It becomes really creepy and really unpleasant. And it's better just avoided. Make up some new shit. Make up some new shit. You make up new shit about Vulcans. There's other stuff about Vulcans that you can tell stories about that relate to their Vulcanness other than Ponfar or fucking Bendai syndrome that Sarek had in one fucking episode. And now that's another thing. Like, oh, Vulcans, that's, they're all about, and plomic soup. Like a reference is made about a thing specific to a particular alien culture in Star Trek. And then it just keeps coming up again and again and again and again, as though it's just that thing, as though Vulcans have like 4 things. Well, they're really logical, and they have Katras, and they do mind melds, and they eat plomic soup, and every 7 years they get super horny. Like, and the really old ones have this disease they get. Like, you can make up new stuff. Make up new stuff. Don't just keep referring to the same handful of things that have been mentioned in episodes in the past. So Ponfar is definitely on the list of things that I would just never mention it again, ever, for any reason. Isaiah Taylor, the date is March 23rd, 1992, and you prepare for the next episode of TNG. Before you can blink, the Enterprise D is destroyed. Then the opening titles. You're like, the fuck? In my opinion, Cause and Effect is one of the most disturbing and mind-numbing pieces of not only Star Trek, but also science fiction. Throughout the entire episode, I absolutely feel the gravity and fear of the main characters. The episode can be very taxing mentally because of how the plot repeats and the intrigue. Also, the FX work is still fresh even 30 plus years later. I really love the old school TNG DS9 graphics, but I'm a 90s person, so... Anyway, what are your thoughts on Cause and Effect? I love that episode. I think it's really interesting that it seems like I like it for different reasons than you. You are relating to it in a way that I don't. Like, to me, the concept makes me feel for the plight of the main characters less. Because once you get the idea, once you understand the concept that it's just going to repeat itself over and over again until they break out of the loop, the repeated destructions of the Enterprise, like that loses any weight, any dramatic weight to me, because the destruction of the Enterprise in and of itself doesn't really matter, because after the destruction of the Enterprise, it's just going to reset the clock and they're going to have another chance to break out. So the tension isn't, oh no, the Enterprise is going to be destroyed. The tension is they're never going to get out of this loop. They're just going to keep repeating the same day over and over and over again. And that's, and that becomes the dilemma. Not necessarily, I mean, obviously, in escaping the loop, they want to prevent the destruction of the ship. That's part of it. But the main dilemma is, how do we stop repeating the same day over and over and over again? So I think it's a really fascinating episode. It is definitely, it's a gutsy way to start an episode. It's one of the most audacious cold opens, maybe the most audacious cold open in the series, where it starts with the destruction of the Enterprise and there's no reset before the credits. Like, the Enterprise blows up and that's it. Then you get the opening credits. Like, there's nothing to indicate that it's going to be a time loop before the opening credits start. Like, the cold open ends with the ship blowing up. So there's no resolution. There's no reassurance. There's no release of tension. It's like, oh shit, the Enterprise blew up. What now? And they leave you hanging. But that's also a hook, because like in your question, you're like, the fuck? You're like, what the fuck is going on here? The first time you watch that episode, you're like, what is this? What are they doing? What are they planning? What can possibly be in store after the first scene is the ship blowing up? And then after the credits, the first act starts, and it starts like every other Star Trek episode. Captain's log, blah, 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 blah. Beauty shot of the ship. Everything's normal. Everybody's fine. Nobody's talking about the fact that the ship just blew up. Doesn't seem like the ship did blow up, actually. Everything's completely normal. What's going on here? So it's a really well-written episode, especially in the early going, to draw you in and to make you curious about what is happening. What was the deal with that cold open where the ship blew up, And then it happens again. And then they come back from commercial and it's Act 2 and the same thing happens, but it's a little different. And gradually the characters start to realize what's going on. They experience deja vu. They feel like they know what's about to happen. They start picking up clues that indicate that they have done these things over and over again, and eventually they figure it out. And the resolution is really clever. And, it's a great episode. But to me personally, I don't find it disturbing or mind-numbing at all. I find it to be really clever and a lot of fun. But yes, if you are closely identifying with the characters in that situation and you're feeling what they feel, yeah, I can see why it would be a really nerve-wracking episode and a really heavy, stressful episode. But that's not the way I connect to it. I connect to it on the basis of, oh, what a great idea and what a clever way of establishing and revealing, the concept and what is going on and how are they going to get out of this, But yeah, it's a great episode. It's a really, really fantastic, one of my favorite TNG episodes, and a TNG episode that I could rewatch pretty much anytime. It's evergreen. Shazy, who just finished watching The Boys and thought it was excellent. Good evening, Steve. Similar to the time I asked you to gush about Chris Evans' Captain America, could you please do the same thing for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man? He's my favorite actor portraying Spider-Man in the live-action films, and both his role in No Way Home and his movie's version of the suit featured in the PS4 game by Insomniac made me very, very happy. I also did not think that Spider-Man 3 was nearly as bad as its detractors claimed, but it did sadden me that the series ended on that note and there are no more movies set in that continuity. If you were in charge of a fourth Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, how would you have progressed the story? Thank you. You have come to the right place because Tobey Maguire is my Spider-Man. I love Tobey Maguire. I think he's a great actor just in general. I've loved him in pretty much anything I've ever seen him in. But he is my Spider-Man. What a wonderful surprise that first Spider-Man movie was, because people forget that Spider-Man was in development hell for so long. I mean, throughout the 80s and 90s, there were so many Spider-Man movie projects that just never came to fruition. For a long time, James Cameron was going to do it. And there was a point where he was going to cast Leonardo DiCaprio as Peter Parker. I think this was before he did Titanic, actually. And DiCaprio was like the hot young actor of the time. And that never happened, obviously. And there were other directors attached to it and other scripts in play. And when Sam Raimi got it, it was kind of like, okay, this is the version that's going to get made. And it was just a fingers crossed situation. Like, I went to see that movie with no expectations. I knew about the history of it. I knew about the troubled development and the past versions that didn't happen. And when I sat down to watch Spider-Man for the first time in a movie theater in 2002, I was ready for it to be awful, right? Because remember, this is, before the Nolan Batman films and the MCU and, the sort of rejuvenation of comic book movies. Like, there had been the X-Men movie the year before that was pretty good, but was pretty good, was surprisingly good. I'll just put it that way and leave it at that. But there, superhero movies did not have a very good track record, creatively or financially. And here comes this Spider-Man movie that's been coming down the pipeline forever, and who the fuck knows. And I liked Tobey Maguire as an actor, but I didn't necessarily see him as Spider-Man. He would not have been my first pick to play Spider-Man. And I watched that movie and it was fantastic. I loved everything about it. I was so thrilled and happy and surprised and just amazed by how good it was, by how good he was, by how good Kirsten Dunst was as Mary Jane, by how good Willem Dafoe was, by how fucking amazing J.K. Simmons was as JJ. I mean, it was great. It was great. And Spider-Man 2 was even better. Spider-Man 2 is still, maybe, ask me on the right day, and I'll tell you, Spider-Man 2 is still the best superhero movie ever made. It's a masterpiece. It's brilliant. It's perfect. It's everything I want out of a superhero movie. And the key, and I agree with you also, by the way, I agree with you. Spider-Man 3 is not nearly as bad as people say. Spider-Man 3 is not as good as Spider-Man 2. I don't think it's as good as the first Spider-Man either, but it definitely has its problems, has too many characters, has too many villains, it's too long, it tries to do too much, but it's way better than people give it credit for, and I do not think it is a bad movie all in all. I like Spider-Man 3 for all of its flaws that I can acknowledge. But Tobey Maguire is who holds it all together, all three movies. And he holds it together because he's able to project Peter Parker's everyman qualities, and he's also able to project Peter's intelligence, his wit a little bit. One of the big criticisms of Tobey's Spidey is that he's not enough of a wisecracker, which I get. That is a little bit of a departure from the comics, because Spidey is one of the definitive traits of Spidey in the comics is that he always has a quip. He's a great banterer. He's a great wisecracker, and subsequent big screen versions of Spider-Man have taken more of an effort to incorporate that into his character. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is a little bit more of a smartass. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is more of a smartass than Tobey's was. But it's a different approach to the character. It foregrounds things other than his sarcasm and his, being a smartass to his villains. He still does that from time to time. He just doesn't do it all the time. It's not like a constant part of his personality. It's still there. But what Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man has more than anything else that makes it work is earnestness. He's not afraid as an actor to give an open-hearted, vulnerable, earnest performance. I know people make fun of him in Spider-Man 2 for, for crying. Not just or in Spider-Man 3 for crying. And in the first Spider-Man 2, because he cries. You see when he gets upset at things, when something tragic happens or something upsetting happens, he cries. And, and he doesn't do like the tough guy, crying but pretending I'm not crying thing. Like he cries like a normal person who's upset. And I love that. I love that vulnerability. I love that earnestness. He reacts to things emotionally like a human being would react to things, and he's a really likable screen presence, and that's vital to Spider-Man. You have to like him. Spider-Man has to be a likable character. He can't be remote. He can't be unapproachable. He can't be like a mysterious cipher where you don't know what he's thinking or what he's doing. Like, he needs to be understandable and approachable and likable. You need to understand why he feels so bad. You need to understand why he is so down on himself, why he doubts himself, why he wonders if he should be Spider-Man. You have to be able to relate to him on that level, because that's central to his character, and Tobey Maguire puts that across. And you feel bad for him, and you view him as an underdog, and you root for him, not just to beat the bad guy, but to improve his station in life, to finally do what he says he's going to do, to not have to stand up Mary Jane on their date because he has to go do Spider-Man stuff, to not disappoint Aunt May, to not inadvertently be a bad friend to Harry. Like, you want him to be able to do everything at once because you want good things for him, because he comes across as a good, decent, likable guy, and you root for him. And how would I have done a fourth Spider-Man movie? I don't know. I would have done whatever Sam Raimi wanted. If he wanted to do the Vulture, or if he wanted to do Rhino, or whatever classic Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, John Romita villain he wanted to do, I would have said, yeah, go for it. Go for it. Do whatever you want. Kara Hughes, hi Steve. Hope it's not too cold over there. Have read some of the severe weather systems in Iowa, and I'm hoping that you aren't too badly affected. Bearing in mind that last year's television movies were mostly god-awful, do you think there's any hope of the movie industry recovering, or is it a lost cause? Keep smiling, Kara. Our weather recently isn't too bad. I mean, it has been snowing here today, and I'm not a fan of that. But it hasn't been like super duper cold. It's gotten down into the teens this past week, which again is colder than I would ever like it to be, but it's not like, below zero, like frigid. Dear God, please don't ever go outside for any reason. It's been inhospitably cold, but it hasn't been, to the point where it's becoming like a hazard or anything. So it's been fun, but thank you for your concerns and thank you for asking. And yeah, all it takes is the next big movie. I mean, I have no reason to predict any particular resurgence this year. But all it ever takes is one good movie. I mean, where would the box office last year have been without Barbie and Oppenheimer? Nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw that coming. People were maybe optimistic that the Barbie movie would do well because it was a property and it had movie stars in it. And, it was something that they were obviously going to market, and it was like a high concept thing. But I don't think anybody expected it to be as big as it was. And I don't think anybody expected Oppenheimer to be as big as it was. Oppenheimer was a massive global blockbuster. And it's a 3-hour biopic about a physicist. And it's terrific. Like, I liked Oppenheimer a lot. But nobody saw that coming as far as its commercial success. Nobody thought, Oppenheimer, that's probably going to make more money than The Dark Knight. Nobody thought that. So you never know what's going to happen. And all it takes is whatever the next big thing is. Now, is that going to mean that the box office is going to come back to the level it was pre-COVID? I don't know. Maybe not. It may never get back to that. But will it continue to improve, and will the industry continue to recover? I think it's likely. I mean, again, I'm not going to say definitely, but there's no reason to think that it wouldn't. You know, you need to, wait for the next thing to show itself, to reveal itself. Dataport Doll, evening Steve. Trek often gets hailed by many as a post-capitalist sci-fi series, or at least a non-capitalist sci-fi series. But personally, I don't entirely agree with the sentiment. Oh, sure, Trek makes a big deal about the no money thing, but on the whole, the writers don't seem to really know what that means. Take Treachery, Faith, and the Great River, the DS9 episode where Nog teaches everyone about the barter economy. It's a comedy episode, of course, but the picture it paints of how economics work in the Federation is kind of absurd. Let alone the fact half the trades are within Starfleet, an organization currently on a war economy, again, whatever that would be for them. But in the absence of capitalism, the apparent opinion on the writing staff was, we don't actually trade things. A helpful, reductive, pro-capitalist stance to take if I ever heard one. Do you think Trek is truly a non-capitalist series or just an absence of economy as a world-building factor? Mostly the second one. I don't think Star Trek is or has ever been deliberately anti-capitalist or non-capitalist in a way that the writers have ever thought out. I mean, I did a video about this years ago about, how do the economics of Star Trek actually work? And the real answer is we don't know, because that's not what the show's about. That's not important. And it's the kind of thing that is interesting to think about. And it's the kind of thing that if you look at the economy that the Federation appears to have, where they don't use money and where there's no such thing as poverty, and people no longer are required to trade their labor for the necessities of life, you can take those basic facts that we can see or infer from what we see on screen, and then build a conversation around that and say, how would this work in real life, and how could we get to something like this from where we are now, and what would that look like, and what would the steps to that be, and I think that's very valuable, and also just interesting and fun to think about, regardless of, whether you're seriously trying to transform the economy or not. But in terms of Star Trek itself and what is actually on screen and the stories that are actually being told, no, that stuff is incidental. It is the way it is probably for the convenience of the writers, and to play into the idea that the Federation, and especially Earth, has become a utopia and has evolved beyond economic problems and things like poverty and economic inequality. And the easiest way to explain, well, how did we get there? How is it that Earth can have this kind of economy where, there is no poverty and everybody is taken care of and everybody has what they need? Well, we've evolved beyond the use of money. We don't need money anymore. We don't charge people for stuff. We don't orient our society that way anymore. We're not worried about material possessions. We let everybody have whatever they need to survive and to live a comfortable life. And what we're more concerned with, our real currency, is self-improvement and reputation and making the world a better place and exploring the universe. That's what we're really worried about. And money, we don't need it anymore. It's not the way we live our lives. It's just part of the overall utopia, right? So it's non-capitalist in that way. But in terms of the details of how things work and how the writers are wanting us to believe they work, and perhaps even planting seeds in our minds of how they could work in our world, in terms of details, I don't think that's ever really been a part of Star Trek. And again, I wouldn't have expected it to be, because that's not what the show's about. That is just stuff sort of in the background, or stuff that was made up on the spot to enable certain other things to happen. So yeah, it's mostly, as you would say, absence of economy as a world building factor, as a storytelling convenience factor is another way I would put it. As a conceit to enable writers to more easily tell the stories that they are actually interested in telling. Yeah. Joe McClory, I find myself disappointed by so much of the media's supportive of Palestine because they seem to be buying into the framing Israel is putting forward. The debate cannot start on the 7th, and it cannot end with things going back to the way they were before the Hamas attack. To pretend that the way Israel was treating Palestinians in and out of Gaza, even before the attacks, was and continues to be a crime against humanity. And while it does not justify the attack on the 7th, to pretend that the attack and hostage-taking was not provoked is dangerous. And even if the current bombing genocide ends, to continue treating Palestinians as less human will lead to the kind of resentment that often ends in more violent attacks. You have said you do not have the answer to tensions in Israel, but I feel like you can agree with me that the answer has to include treating all Palestinians with the respect and humanity that every person from Israel would expect for themselves. Thoughts? Agreed 100%. Agreed 100%. Whatever the solution ultimately is, whether it's a two-state solution or a shared single state where Palestinians and the people who are now considered Israelis share equally in the power, in the political power, and there isn't like a dominant population and a captive population, but just a single population with equal rights and equal access sharing the same area, like whatever it is, whether it's one state, two state, whatever. The Palestinians need to be treated as equals, need to be given full rights under the law, need to be given freedom of movement within the country, need to, there need to be not physically contained within particular areas. No more open air prisons, no more territories where you're Palestinians, you're Gazans, you stay here, you don't get to leave unless we tell you to. And all of your utilities are under our control. And, that there has to be an end to that. Because you're right, that has never been acceptable. This did not begin on October 7th, and it can't end with the end of these current hostilities. There has to be a transformation of the entire situation, and part of that transformation needs to be equality for Palestinians, humanitarian guarantees, human rights for Palestinians. On the West Bank as well. I mean, we talk mostly about Gaza recently because that's the focus of the Israeli attacks and the devastation. But the Palestinians living in the West Bank are not being treated right either. That I am not informed enough or smart enough or thoughtful enough to know what the specific resolution should be. But it must be equality and fair treatment and full legal rights, whether it's in their own country or as a part of Israel's country for the Palestinian people. There should be no other acceptable resolution than that. A very tired, overworked, underpaid, and irritated some random geek. So Steve, on my Sunday stream, a new viewer came in and inquired about Joey Fire Lame Deer's situation. I have a command and panel on my Twitch channel for them, info and link to their GoFundMe. They asked, how is Joey disabled? I didn't have an answer because I don't know, nor do I care. Joey is disabled and can't work. And they were denied SSI. To which the viewer said, if they were denied SSI, the judge probably got a good reason. Why do people think this way? This is a kind of bias, right? Which one is it? And this was the start to the conversation I had with this viewer. As you could imagine, it didn't go well. I think I was screaming at some point, I am a fucking communist. But I fucking hate that mentality. There must be a reason Joey was denied SSI. If they go homeless because they're too lazy to work, that is their fault. We can't have folks abuse the system like that. That is my taxpayer dollars there. Why do folks think like this? And how can we change that? A lot of it is, maybe it's a result of propaganda. Maybe it's a result of just the influence of conservative thinking. But there is a pre-existing suspicion in the minds of a lot of people who receive disability payments from the government or people who seek disability payments from the government. And it's just something that needs to be pushed against, because you're right. The actual level of fraud that exists, or attempted fraud that exists, in social welfare programs in this country. People who do legitimately have no reason to need these payments, but try to scam disability from the government. Like, that is so rare. It accounts for such a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the overall money spent on disability and other, forms of social welfare in this country, that it's really nothing for us to worry about. There are people who work for the government whose job it is to worry about that. And that is usually my response, like when people say, that's my tax dollars at work. Okay, well, your tax dollars also pay for people whose job it is to worry about that. So don't you fucking worry about it. It's not your problem. You pay your taxes and let the people who are paid to worry about how your taxes are spent worry about that. And if they find that some people are getting disability payments that don't actually qualify for them or whatever, then that's not your problem, right? That's not your problem. And if someone is taking up a GoFundMe collection for somebody because they're disabled, and you have a pre-existing bias against them and you think that your money would be wasted, then don't fucking donate. But otherwise, keep your mouth shut. Personally, I think it is probably, people who go to the trouble of starting GoFundMes or have friends start GoFundMes or crowdfunding campaigns, whatever the platform, and have their friends push them and, are constantly asking people to contribute to them. Like, that's such a hassle and so much fucking work. I'm sure there are people, I'm sure there are scammers that do that, right? I'm positive there are. But most people who start a GoFundMe for, their medical bills, or because they can't afford to pay rent, or they can't afford to keep the lights on, or whatever, they're doing that because they have a genuine need. And whether you, in your infinite wisdom, would judge that their need qualifies them by some standard you adhere to or not, that's not the point. The point is, this was created because someone has a genuine need. And if you want to help them meet that need, and you are able to, and you can part with a few extra bucks to help them meet that need, then do it. And don't feel bad about it. And don't question yourself. And you know what? If it turns out that the person you donated to actually didn't need the money and they were just trying to scam a few bucks off of people, oh well, that's life. That's probably not going to happen. But I don't think you should let the extremely unlikely chance that it will happen stop you from doing it if that's what you want to do. Stop you from helping someone if that's what you want to do. It just doesn't make sense to me. And this like parental mentality, this like unpaid regulator mentality, like, well, I don't know if she really deserves that SSI. Who fucking cares? Who hired you to audit who gets SSI and who doesn't? Who hired you to determine whether or not someone who has a GoFundMe really needs it? If you think they don't need it, then don't fucking give to it. It's as simple as that. But if you think that someone is in need and you can help them, then help them. Because they probably need it. Like, odds are that they need it. That's why they're asking for it. This like, nobody's going to care if you turn out to be a sucker, right? If you turn out, I just don't want to be taken advantage of. There's like this phobia that these people have. Well, I don't want to be taken advantage of. I don't want to give money to someone. It turns out they don't really need it. Who fucking cares? You think, if the worst thing that ever happens to you is you give money to somebody and it turns out they don't really need it, and they were just gold bricking to get a few extra bucks from somebody, if that's the worst thing that happens to you, then you lead a pretty charmed fucking life. Who fucking cares? If I end up spending a few bucks on somebody and it turns out they didn't need it, oh well, I can live with that. I would rather be that person than be a person who is so skeptical and cynical and hard-hearted that I feel like I have to interrogate everybody who is asking for money and is telling people they're in need because I think, I don't know, I just want to make sure that I'm not being taken advantage of. Fuck you. Get over yourself. Do you have the money? Do you want to help somebody? Then fucking do it. If not, then move on and do something else with your life. Fuck. I'm glad you yelled at him. I personally am not a communist, as you know, but I'm very glad that you yelled at that person, because fuck that person and fuck that attitude. Miss Mopey, and for everybody, just so you know, this is Dana. This is Dana's question, Miss Mopey. Hey, Steve, it's been a pretty dismal week here, but at least I made it through. And I have heard that there may be some interesting roster changes coming up in the world of wrestling. Aside, that's got a nice ring to it. If I ever start my own wrestling company, that's what I'll call it, World of Wrestling. Anyway, it would be nice to hear something hopeful and positive. So what would your ideal developments be in the world of wrestling? First of all, there used to be a magazine called World of Wrestling. I don't think there ever has been or currently is a company like a wrestling promotion called World of Wrestling. There is one called Women of Wrestling that has the same initials, but I think World of Wrestling is available. You might want to look it up, though, just to be sure. But anyway, yes, so the big news this week is that Kazuchika Okada, who is the biggest wrestling star in Japan and has been my default pick for best wrestler in the world for the last many, many years, a fantastic star and a fantastic wrestler. He has been the mainstay of New Japan Pro Wrestling for the last 15 years, something like that. He's their number one guy, the biggest star in Japan and the biggest star in the biggest company in Japan. He's leaving. He is leaving New Japan Pro Wrestling at the end of this month. And speculation is hot and heavy that he will be signing with one of the two major American wrestling companies, either WWE or AEW. He has worked for AEW before because AEW has a working relationship with New Japan, and he has been featured as a New Japan talent on AEW shows in the past. So you would think he would be more comfortable going there. And plus the schedule in AEW is much lighter. They don't really do house show tours. They're mostly just a televised wrestling company. They do their TV shows and their pay-per-views, and that's it. So theoretically, he could continue to live in Japan if he wanted. He wouldn't have to move to the United States. He could just fly in for the shows that he was needed on, and that might be better for him too. But if he works for WWE, it's, he has more of a potential to become a really big star if he is used correctly, if he's used to his potential. And if he becomes a big star, the chance to make a lot more money, even though I'm sure his offer from AEW would be huge. But, AEW doesn't tour, except for their TV shows. AEW has a terrible merchandise arm. Merchandise in AEW is infamously terrible, especially at live events. And their TV show doesn't have nearly as big of an audience, and their TV show is absolutely awful at making people look like stars. So, the schedule would be a lot lighter and he would probably know more people. But if he signs with WWE and they really get behind him and decide to feature him as a star, which I wish they would, and I think they should, because like I said, he's the best wrestler in the world. Then, I think he has the potential to not only make a lot more money, but to become a much bigger star. And WWE has WrestleMania, which is a thing unto itself at this point. It's every little kid who grows up dreaming of being a wrestler. You dream about working WrestleMania, and AEW can't offer that because they don't have WrestleMania. That's a WWE thing. So there's that too. But the schedule is a lot more demanding. WWE does do live event tours all over the country. So he would probably have to move to the United States, and would then be away from home a lot more. Because he'd actually be on the road multiple days out of the week as a WWE wrestler, working the house show circuit. So there are pros and cons, for which company he would sign with. And I think it's probably more likely than not that he signs with AEW, but I would not be shocked if he signed with WWE. And I kind of hope he does sign with WWE, because WWE is the company that I watch now. I don't watch AEW anymore. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which being that the product fucking sucks and is unwatchable. So selfishly, I would like for Okada to sign with WWE because then I get to watch him wrestle. But I have a caveat with that, which is, unfortunately, WWE does not have the best track record when it comes to using Japanese wrestlers. They don't feature them as well as they should. I mean, one of their top stars now is Shinsuke Nakamura, who was kind of Okada before Okada. He was the big star in New Japan, 10 years ago or so, before he signed with WWE. And again, fantastic talent. One of the best wrestlers in the world. Just an absolutely mind-boggling talent. And he has languished in WWE for years. They have finally started using him again in a somewhat more acceptable role the past few months. And his recent stuff has been a little better than it has been for the past several years. But that's, it's still sort of like, he's one of the greatest wrestlers in the world, and you've got him basically fucking around doing whatever instead of making him one of the focal points of your show, which I think you should be doing. And that's my fear with Okada, is that they would bring Okada in and they wouldn't know what to do with him, or they would overthink it, or they would do stuff with him that he wouldn't be good at or that he wouldn't be suited for. They would try to force a square peg into a round hole, or whatever, which WWE has a history of doing, unfortunately. So, it's hard for me to be unreservedly optimistic about either possibility, but I would love to see Okada in WWE, just because at least then I would get to see him. And there is the chance that they would know what to do with him and be able to do it. And Okada, living up to his full potential in WWE, would be fantastic, because there are a lot of people there that he could work with and have fantastic matches and fantastic programs. So the potential there is really, really exciting. Will it happen? I have no idea, but my fingers are crossed. So that's my ideal development of the possibilities. The big story is Okada, and my ideal development is Okada going to WWE. Air One Fire, who is too depressed to come up with a funny name. Hi, Steve. You said several times that you have a great work ethic. At least it sounded like that. Do you have any advice for a chronic procrastinator? Let me explain my situation. I'm self-employed, and if I worked 3 to 4 hours a day, I would be on top of all my projects, have all the money I need, live alone, zero stress. But most of the time, I work on a last-minute basis. My clients are impatient. I struggle to make payments on time, have to have roommates, and live in massive stress. Meds help for suicidal ideation a little, but not enough in high stress. Do you ever have trouble motivating yourself as a self-employer? Have you ever struggled with this? Do you have some sort of system? Honestly, when you speak about your routine, I can't believe that's possible. Also, Voyager Season 4 was very fun to watch. I'm glad you enjoyed Voyager Season 4. The thing that makes my work ethic possible is the routine. And I got into I wish I could tell you an easy answer. For me, it was establishing a routine and sticking to it. And the way you establish a routine is you just have to do it. And it sucks at first. And sometimes it sucks even after you get into it. There are times when my routine still sucks. There are times when I know I have a script to write that I know is going to be a monster, that is going to take me days to write, and I just don't want to do it. But I have to do it. And that's why I do it. Like, I sit down and I write. I force myself to write. And I know that if I don't like what I'm writing now, when I finish, I can go back and I can fix it. But I worry about that later. Right now, I have to write because that's what pays the bills. That's what puts food on the table. You can't make a video until you write a video, and that's what I have to do. It's not always like that. In fact, it's often not like that, thankfully. But even when the work comes easy, there's still a lot of work to do. The bulk of it, the labor of it, is still often daunting and not very fun. And the way I'm able to do it so consistently is I have a routine. And the way you establish a routine is you just do it. And you have to force yourself to do it. You have to be hard on yourself. You have to have willpower. You have to have determination. You have to say, I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm going to do the thing that I need to do. Not because I necessarily want to do it, but because I know that's what I should do. And you get into the habit, you get into the routine, you do it and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again until it just becomes part of what you do. And then after you get to that point where it's just part of what you do, you've established your routine, then it still isn't going to be fun all the time. It's still going to feel like work a lot of the time, but you are going to be better able to do it. You know, you'll have less of an obstacle of unwillingness, you know, of reluctance to get through. But the only solution in my experience is just to do it. And it's not easy and it's not fun and it's going to suck, especially at first. But that's the best way to do it. And for me, that's the only way to do it. You have to establish that routine. And listen, you think that my routine, as I describe it, is not possible? Believe me, it's very possible. I'm sure there are people who work for YouTube, who do YouTube videos for a living. I'm sure there are people who work harder than I do. There must be. I mean, and I work pretty hard, or at least I work a long time. I don't, you can judge for yourself whether it's hard work or not, but I work a lot. A lot of my day, a lot of my week is taken up doing work stuff, doing YouTube related stuff. You know, but I'm sure there must be people that work even harder at it than me. So it's not impossible. And whatever schedule you need to keep to meet your goals and reach your level of comfort and make the amount of money you want to make and get into the situation you want to be in. If it is like, if it is just a matter of you just need to work more or you need to work more consistently or whatever, if that's what is holding you back and it's not circumstances beyond your control or anything like that, if it's just you need to work smarter or work harder or work in a more, you know, have a more consistent work routine, you can do that. You can do that. That is a completely attainable goal. That's the good news. The bad news is getting into that rhythm, getting into that routine is going to suck ass at first. But if you can grit your teeth and put your shoulder into it and get through that really difficult early part and break through to a point where it just becomes part of your routine, then it will be so much better for you. But you just have to do it. Matt L. watching Voyager with the GF, third time for me, first for her. I know you dislike the series, so this will be an easy dunk for you, but do you wish Voyager was more consistent with battle damage, shuttles lost, etc.? I'm not expecting a running tally on screen of shuttles, but there are episodes where the ship takes severe damage and is magically all better by next week. Talk of power problems are only dealt with by Neelix's cooking. Equinox is much more realistic if a ship were stranded. I really like 2004 Battlestar Galactica for the same way as they track fleet population. And you see where the ship has been hit in previous episodes as they keep those details in. Is this just a silly gripe or do I have a point here? P.S. Thoughts on Tuvix? Girlfriend thinks Janeway was right, but I think the captain was a murderer. He was a sentient life form and she kills him. I agree with you. Janeway was in the wrong with Tuvix. I think she did kill a sentient life form that she had no reason and no justification for killing. But the real sin of Tuvix is the way that episode was written and the fact that, you know, you mentioned the battle damage. The fallout from Tuvix is another example where that should have been a major event in the lives of these characters. And because of the way Voyager was written, by the next episode, it was as if it had never happened. And the thing about that is, as I think I talked about when I made a video about it, if that is the show you're doing, if you're doing a show like Voyager where you want it to be rigidly episodic and you want the episodes to be so self-contained that you can end an episode and start the next one and it's as if the previous episode never happened, there are ways to write the Tuvix story that make sense in that format. You know? You can't do it the way they did it, because the way they did it, it seems to demand that there are aftershocks. This seems like an incredibly important event in the lives of these people that they would not just forget about. It seems like it would change the entire dynamic on the ship. It would change the way people on this ship thought about themselves, thought about their captain, thought about their mission, their principles, whatever. assuming they are thoughtful and moral people, which we are led to believe they are, right? And they didn't do that. So what they should have done is write the Tuvix episode in such a way that it was more believable that they would be able to get past it and get on with their lives by the next episode. And they didn't do that. But yeah, it's not just the battle damage. I mean, the battle damage is a really obvious result of it, as are the number of shuttles and the number of photon torpedoes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more the fact that Voyager does not take advantage of the dramatic possibilities of its premise. You know, if the premise of your show is that these people are trapped on the other side of the galaxy, cut off from their usual resources, all by themselves, forced to travel unfamiliar territory completely on their own, and therefore conserve what resources they have, and, you know, be forced to make certain choices based on the finite nature of their resources. Like, that to me is great fuel for drama and should dictate to a certain extent what the show is, what stories the show tells, what choices the characters make, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be highly serialized. You can still do standalone episodes, but just acknowledge the situation. You know, that's what Deep Space Nine did. I've said this many times. Deep Space Nine is not nearly as serialized as people remember it being. It's still mostly standalone episodes. But the thing Deep Space Nine does that Voyager hardly ever does is, with Deep Space Nine, characterization sticks. With Deep Space Nine, when major events happen in the lives of these characters or within their world, those events stick. They matter. They carry across into the next episode, or at least into some future episode. Not in the sense that the plot of the next episode picks right up where the last one left off. It's not that serialized for the most part. There are phases of the show where it is that serialized, or almost that serialized. But for the most part, it's standalone episodes. But the events of the episodes affect the environment, affect the world that the characters live in, affect the personalities of the characters, affect their relationships with each other. Voyager doesn't do that. And given the fact that Voyager's premise would seem to make it perfect for that kind of thing, because of their limited resources, because they are in unfamiliar territory, because they need to be making allies and looking for, you know, fuel and food and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and being able to make repairs when necessary. Like, these are things that should be driving plots and driving stories in this show. And they almost never do. And that's a disappointment, you know? So it's not just, well, they should, you know, they should still be showing battle damage from last week. Yeah, they should. And they should be doing lots of other things that show repercussions from last week too. That's the thing. Ranter Matt, hi Steve. As an avid Star Trek fan, do you ever catch yourself armchair rewriting certain episodes or events in Star Trek that could potentially make things better or worse for the cast of whichever Star Trek show? If a particular situation probably could have gone farther in your estimations, but didn't do either to the writers didn't think about it, or other real-world concerns like tech or budget. I had a thought after they basically neutered the Borg in Voyager on how they could have made the Borg even more nightmarish. Like when a ship engages the Borg knocks out their shields and then fires what appears to be torpedoes that impacts the hull but doesn't damage it, but instead the torpedoes contain Borg nanoprobes that assimilate through the hull and into the interior, infecting both systems, and lashes out their injector tubes to assimilate people from the walls and floor. That would, of course, be probably too horrific that could be countered and thus end the show. Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about that sort of thing in the last question as far as, you know, doing armchair rewriting, you know, thinking of ways they could have taken better advantage of the premise of the show. I've also done that for TNG. I did a video last year, I think, or maybe a year before, about rewriting a Wesley episode. I think I did a video about Wesley in general, too, about how Wesley, gets kind of a bad rap from the fan base. But also that, the worst thing about Wesley, like Voyager, is the wasted potential. Like, Wesley could have been a different perspective in the cast. Wesley could have been an opportunity for the writers of TNG to challenge some of the assumptions that the other characters have, to interrogate Starfleet and the Federation, and, force us in the audience to ask ourselves, do they really live by the principles they say they live by? Or what does that mean? How difficult is it to live by these principles? Because Wesley can be the character who comes in and he's innocent and he's naive, and his parents are both in Starfleet, and his father died in the line of duty, so he's always dreamed of becoming a Starfleet officer and serving on a starship just like his dad and his mom, and now he's on the Enterprise with his mom, where she's the chief medical officer, and his dad's best friend is the captain, and he looks up to him, and, he's this doe-eyed innocent who has lived his entire life with the ideal of Starfleet, with the dream of Starfleet, with, the pure concept of it. And then he lives out the reality of it. People die. Moral compromises have to be made. Sometimes you have to break the Prime Directive to do the right thing. Sometimes in keeping the Prime Directive, you can't do something else that you might feel like you want to do or should do. There are there's violence, there's death, there's danger. It's all these things that he didn't expect that might disillusion him, that might change his perspective, that might cause him to question certain things, that might force other characters to question certain things or to have to explain things they never really thought about. Like there's all sorts of potential with a character like that, to develop that character, to develop the characters around him, to offer different perspectives on the world of the show, on the premise of the show, on the mission of this ship and what it's doing out here and whether it's doing good or bad or whatever. And just like Voyager didn't take advantage of its premise, TNG didn't even attempt to do anything like that with Wesley. And that is a terrible waste of potential. So that's an example of armchair rewriting that I have indulged in. My idea for the Borg in Voyager is just not to do them. Because the best way to handle the Borg is not to do the Borg. Because the Borg are the terrifying, unbeatable villain, and once you do the story where you beat the unbeatable villain, that's it. Do something else. You crack that eggshell. Time to do something else. But yeah, if they wanted to build the Borg back up as a scary threat again, they could do something like you suggest, or they could do something like, have the crew of the Voyager encounter another ship and befriend them, and maybe have Voyager and this other ship travel side by side for a few episodes and lull the audience into a false sense of security where they start to think, well, maybe this is going to be the show from now on. Maybe Voyager is going to be about these two ships working together in this alliance they forged, and then have the Borg come in and fucking kill everyone on that ship. Right? Like, after you've established them, after you've gotten to know them, after you've put work into building out their characters and giving the audience reasons to like them and care about them and expect that they're going to stick around at least for a while, and then here come the Borg and they're all fucking dead. Something like that could work to kind of reheat the Borg as well. But like, the best thing with the Borg and Voyager would have been to not have the Borg and Voyager at all. And finally, this is the question that came in with 3 seconds to spare from John Burns. So God damn it, John, this better be a good one. John Burns, Russia is better than China because they don't have a one-party state. Okay, I'm going to see where the rest of this question goes. But it is news to me that Russia does not have a one-party state. This is interesting, as both countries had civil wars in the last century. Russia after World War I and the Revolution, China after World War II. Russia did have a one-party state for a while, but eventually that crumbled, while China has had an imperial system for so long, all they really even know is one-party system. One-party systems are not democracies. They might as well be absolute monarchies. It's like the differences between socialist and communist parties. Socialist parties appreciate the value of democracies, while communist parties don't play well with others. Russia will always have power in the world. It's far too big to be ignored. China has been ignored sometimes because they ignored the rest of the world. Not sure if that was foolish or a form of bigotry. What do you think? I think if a country has elections where only one candidate has even a remote chance of winning the election, and the election results usually come out as like 90-something% in favor of that candidate, and that candidate runs in every election and always wins and has been in power for 10, 15, 20 years, and there doesn't seem to be any realistic expectation of them leaving power short of their death or their violent overthrow, then that's not a democracy, and that's not a two-party state. That's a one-party state. I mean, Russia has other political parties, but not really. Not for any practical purpose. Russia is a one-party state, no less than China is. Just because they might put more effort into pretending they're a democracy, nobody seriously buys that outside of the people who buy it in Russia. And not everybody in Russia buys it either. A lot of people in Russia realize this is horseshit, that Putin is not a small d Democrat, that they are not living in a representative democracy, that it's a dictatorship, that it's a one-party state. Because only one party, Putin's party, is ever going to win the election. Anyway, worth the wait. Worth the wait. All right, everybody, that's it for the patron questions. I'm sorry that took so long. There were a lot of questions. This is usually around the time where I would be ending the show, but I will hang around for a little while to talk to people in the chat if you feel like sticking around. I'm sorry that I didn't get to the chat until this late. But before I turn to the chat, there is one more thing we have to do, and hopefully you're still up for this one, because it's time for the Stuffy Short. It's time for a brand new Stuffy Short that will go up as a standalone YouTube short on my channel tomorrow, but you get to see it right now in full screen, in all of its glory. So please enjoy this brand new Stuffy Short, and then I'll be back afterwards to hang out in the chat for a little while.
Are you any good at paper, rock, scissors?
Not particularly.
Me neither.
Hey, Jack, are you hanging around for lunch?
Not if that's how you'll be dressed at the table, for Christ's sake.
What are you wearing?
Long underwear. What? It's cold.
And the shorts?
For the pockets. Long johns don't have pockets.
You know what else has pockets? A bloody pair of pants.
You're one to talk. All right, look, if you really find it so upsetting, don't think of it as long johns. Think of it as an incomplete George Reeves Superman costume. I'm just missing the S and the cape.
And the boots.
And the muscles.
Hey now! George's costume was padded. This is all me, baby.
What's that meant to be?
The Superman pose.
I don't see it.
Ta-da! Hope you enjoyed that. I kind of like that one, selfishly. Self-praise is cheap praise, but I kind of like it. Okay. I'm going to turn over to the live chat, and I want to catch up on all these super chats that y'all have been sending me. Thank you so much. I guess you couldn't wait. You couldn't hold back. So thank you so much for the super chats. I'm going to go through these one by one really quickly. John Burns sent me a bunch of them. Here's the first few from John. Thank you, John, by the way, very much. He says, just sent my question. Hope I'm not late. You weren't. 3 seconds, buddy. 3 seconds. John Burns says, Frankenstein wasn't heady sci-fi. You know, I thought about Mary Shelley when I was thinking about that. I suppose Frankenstein counts as sci-fi. We usually think of it as horror, but I guess it would be sci-fi as well. And John also says, you don't like Klingon blood wine. Don't you know how many Klingons have to bleed for the wine? Notice how Klingons don't get pluralized, like that Tropic Thunder comment about Chineses. Actually, I know exactly how many Klingons have to bleed for blood wine. 0, because there are no Klingons and there is no blood wine. Sean O'Sullivan with a super chat. Why do you wear hats indoors? It's disrespectful. Well, I mean, do I need another reason? If people are that annoyed by someone wearing a hat indoors, then that's a good enough reason to wear it for me. Because I think that's a really silly thing to get annoyed about. It's never even crossed my mind to be upset that someone was wearing a hat indoors. I've never given a shit. And the reason I wear hats indoors and outdoors as well is because I just like the way I look in them. I think I look better in a hat. I always have. And I've always been more comfortable with a hat on. I mean, I take it off from time to time. I take it off for videos when I feel like, if I'm like playing a character or I'm doing something in the video that I think I shouldn't have a hat on, I'm perfectly comfortable taking it off and letting people see my thinning hairline. But I wear the hat most of the time because that's just what I feel most comfortable. Another one from John says, who picked Pakistani-Iran war for 2024? Are we taking is there a pool? I didn't know there was a pool. Another one from John, Star Trek 3 had Ponfar, questions of sex assumptions. Savick could have been showing Spock a calming ritual, Vulcans embracing logic, magic to others. Yeah, there's the Ponfar thing when Spock is, regenerating in Star Trek 3. And yeah, if that wasn't Ponfar, it could be, they could have, had that be something else, Another one from John, Super Chat, says, are police reunions retarding American society? Yeah, absolutely they are. They are holding back American society. I mean, they're certainly an impediment to necessary police reform, for sure, and they always have been. That's been their function since they were created. So yes, and police reform is something that is very necessary to improve American society. So yes, they are. They definitely are. Another one from John says, season 2, Dr. Crusher gone. Season 3, no abandoned Wesley issues. I'm kind of glad they didn't go that way with Wesley. I'm kind of glad they didn't really focus on, Mom, you abandoned me, you left me. Like the writing of Wesley was so scattershot in TNG that I'm kind of glad they didn't try to do Wesley has mommy issues on top of everything else. Stephen Clenard with the member message. Yeah, put the hat back on, please. So you don't like it like this? You like it better this way. Not like this. Like this. Okay. I like it better like this too. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you for the super chat, or thank you for being a member, and thank you for sending a member message. And this one just came in from Boxy Brown 6900. What's the graphic on your hat? This is, sorry, Steve, and I'm going to take it off again real quick. That is a circular patch depicting the flag of the great state of Maryland. That is what the flag of Maryland looks like. And as I have said many times, the flag of Maryland is the best flag. That is why I now have it on my hat. It's the Maryland flag. I'm a proud Marylander and proud of my Maryland flag. All right, let's see what the live chat has to say. Oh, Kara says, I have rewritten 3 TOS episodes. There you go. Good for you. Dana Cole in the chat with us, is a habitual rewriter. I hope I'm not calling you out, Dana. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Dana is a reflexive rewriter. She rewrites just what I think it's just her natural way of engaging with media. She's like, I will, to the point where I will tell Dana about a scene in a movie that I just watched, or, a TV show I just watched, or whatever, or just in something I like. And, maybe not 9 times out of 10, but 8 times out of 10, her immediate response after I get done telling her about the thing was, here's how I would have done that. Like, it's a reflex with Dana. So she is also a very prolific rewriter. Wireless Mike 73, have you heard about the new talks of a 4th film in the Kelvin timeline being back in the works? Yes. And I hope that it actually goes somewhere this time. Fingers crossed. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 times. I don't know whose fault it is, but get your shit together. Make the movie. Let's see. Yeah, Ranter Matt talking about Voyager here. No star bases, very limited trade partners. Voyager should come back barely looking like the ship they left in, or the power sources or weapons they use. Yeah, I mean, it should bear the marks of its journey. like physically and in terms of changes they would have had to make to the ship, and also just emotionally and in terms of the crew's personalities. There was something, I think, was it Ronald D. Moore? Ronald D. Moore was on the writing staff of Voyager for one season after Deep Space Nine ended. He moved over to Voyager for one season and then he left. And he gave an interview after he left that was really interesting. And one of the things he said was one of the problems he had with the show, especially compared to Deep Space Nine that he was coming off of, was he said on Voyager, you watch the show and all of the characters seem like they expect to be home tomorrow. Like you never feel the weight of how far they are from home. You know, it's like, oh, they don't seem depressed. They don't seem worried. They don't seem anxious. It doesn't seem to be important in their everyday lives at all. Like the fact that they're so far from home and that in all likelihood, they're never going to get home, you know, or they're not going to get home in their lifetime. Like it seems like it doesn't bother them. It's not a factor, you know, and that is a good way to describe it. It seems like they all expect that they'll be home by tomorrow, you know? See you, Mac. I'll never have not seen Stephen Long Johns again. Yep, it's part of your life now. It's in your brain forever. 2-5AD says, I saw an article about a woman who got trapped in a fast food deep freeze. Company fined $800,000 for ignoring safety issues, even though they made $1 billion a year. How would you punish them? Fine them a lot more than that. Force them to pay that woman a whole bunch of money. Subject them to more rigorous safety inspections, because obviously that's a necessity. Like there's all kinds of things I would do to that company to punish them and to make sure that doesn't happen. Kane 20C, what if they wear the hat indoors and backwards? Then they are not a friend of mine. Then in my estimation, they're unfit for polite society. They should be shunned. They should be treated as undesirables. Wearing a baseball cap backwards for any reason other than you are playing catcher or you are doing a dramatic role where you are playing a douchebag who wears their hat backwards. Anything other than that, it is unacceptable and should not be allowed and should not be tolerated. And people who do wear their hats backwards should be shunned from society. Electric Angel, hey Steve, I came across your Star Trek content lately, but I have known about you since the Atheist days. Well, good to know. Welcome. Glad you could be here. Hope you're enjoying the content that you're watching from me, whatever it may be. Azalea Jane, it's hard to imagine Steve without a hat. Who remembers the Hagerstown Suns? Yeah, baby. That's right. I still have my old Suns hats in the closet back there. I don't wear them anymore because they got looking kind of shabby, but I still have them. Yeah, and unfortunately, the Suns are no longer with us, but we're going to have a new team this year, the Flying Boxcars that I mentioned last time because I showed the hat last time. When the season starts, I have a Flying Boxcars hat that I'm going to start wearing instead of the Maryland hat. But yeah, the Suns, they live forever in our hearts. 255 AD says, do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea to just retcon stuff in a franchise that's unpopular? Like, suppose future Trek shows tried to make it so Enterprise or Trek 5 never happened. Well, I think it's a bad idea to do that because you don't need to retcon anything, especially with something like Star Trek where there's so much of it. You don't need to retcon anything. Just ignore it. Right? I mean, my stance is always, if you have a story that, for whatever reason, demands a retcon and the story is good enough to justify it, then do it. But there's lots of stuff that doesn't even need to be retconned, especially if it's a big franchise with, a bunch of different shows and movies. Like, you don't need to retcon anything. You can do just tell your fucking story. There's so many Star Trek stories that make no reference whatsoever to the events of Star Trek Enterprise or Star Trek 5. Doesn't mean they had to retcon anything. It just doesn't factor in. It's not important to that story. Nor should it be in most cases, So no, I don't think it's not a good idea to worry about continuity like that. unless you have to because of the specific story you're telling. You know, if it has nothing to do with the story you're telling, then don't fucking worry about it. You don't have to retcon anything. Just leave it be. Just leave it be. But yeah, unless there is there's no reason to retcon. Like Star Trek V was a shitty movie, but that's not a reason to erase it from existence. I don't think Star Trek V should be retconned because it was a bad movie. I don't think Star Trek Enterprise should be bad because people think it's a bad show. You know, like just like people who are like, you know, oh, they should retcon the Star Wars sequels and redo those because you know, I thought those were terrible. Well, I mean, A, lot of people didn't think they were terrible, or at least didn't think all of them were terrible. And B, is having bad movies in your franchise the worst fucking thing in the world? Like, is that really that big? There's so much bad Star Trek. I would not retcon any of it just for the sake of removing it from continuity. Who gives a shit? Just do better Star Trek. Just do better Star Trek from now on. Right? Like, is Star Trek 6 any worse because Star Trek 5 was bad? Would Star Trek 6 have been better if they explicitly established something in Star Trek 6 to say that actually Star Trek 5 never happened? No. Who fucking cares? Just do better next time. Couple more super chat or a member message from Boxy Brown 6900. What about wearing your hat to the side? Also unacceptable. This right here. This is the only acceptable way to wear a baseball cap. This right here. Don't you love how judgmental I am? And another super chat from John Burns. Russia isn't a democracy, but people on another planet can do the right thing. Are you an American concerned with the Cubans enjoying your cigar? I don't even know what that means. I don't give a fuck if Cubans enjoy. I hope Cuban people are okay. I just hope they can live their lives and be happy and free and whatever. Like, I don't give a fuck if they enjoy my cigars or not. And what does Russia being not a democracy have to do with people on another planet doing the right? I don't understand what you're talking about, John. Isaiah says, will late seating review Space Camp? Probably not. I don't think it meets our criteria. I don't think Jason would go for it. I would love to review Space Camp because I loved Space Camp when I was a kid. I loved that movie. But we probably won't do it. Unless, I guess I could pick it for like my birthday movie one year, maybe. Maybe I'll do that at some point. But short of something like that, I wouldn't expect us to do it. Stephen G. Clark, if you wear a baseball hat sideways, you are required to start every sentence with yo, 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 check it out, my dogs. And nobody wants that. Yeah, especially not for me. You don't want to see me try to be like Vanilla Ice, but sincerely, you know, like not making fun of Vanilla Ice, but like trying to be that way for a shoot. You don't want that. Michael Handeline, on the subject of hats, have fedoras been ruined forever? Always liked them because of 1940s detectives, but now I feel they've been ruined by association to a certain type of dude. You are correct. You are correct. 255 AD says, one cop asks his partner, why did you let the suspect go, then resign? He replies, you told me to play good cop and I'm a method actor. That is good. I do like that. I do like that. That's funny. Stephen G. Clenard, no Ken Griffey. Okay, fine. Yes. Okay. You got me. There is a Ken Griffey Jr. exception. Yes. Because Ken Griffey Jr. was such a godlike baseball player in his prime. If he wanted to wear his hat backwards, who am I to question him? So yes, there is an exception to every rule. And Ken Griffey Jr. can wear his baseball cap any goddamn way he pleases. Because he was Ken Griffey Jr. He still is. But when he was an active player, he was Ken Griffey Jr. One of the greatest of all time. One of the greatest of his generation. So yes, Ken Griffey Jr. can wear his hat backwards. Of course he can. Of course he can. Azalea Jane, I don't think I heard that Carlin bit. I'm familiar with a couple of his list bits, but I'm not familiar with, at least I can't remember the bit where he just lists things that annoy him. I know he had a couple of bits where he would just read lists of things like his favorite curse words or his favorite euphemisms for things or whatever. But yeah, I've never heard that he specified white guys who wear their baseball caps backward, but that makes me happy. That makes me happy. George was smart. George was, you know, on the right side of a lot of issues, including how baseball caps ought to be worn. Silent Bob was a fictional character. And to my way of thinking, at least, not an aspirational one. But yes, Silent Bob also did wear his cap backwards. Kara says, I'm going to have to go to bed soon. Can barely keep my eyes open. Yeah, I'm going to wrap it up soon. I'm sorry that I took so long getting through the patron and member questions, everybody. I want to make sure I catch at least a few more questions from the chat, and then I will wrap it up as well. Gedrin, why batteries not included for late seating? Again, probably not. Probably not. John Burns with the super chat. Space Camp suffered from the space shuttle boom. You mean the space shuttle blowing up, I assume, not the space shuttle boom as in the frequency of space shuttle flights. You mean the space shuttle blowing up? Yeah, I think it did. I think maybe people might not have been as, you know, looking forward to watching a movie about a bunch of kids and teenagers going up in a space shuttle when, you know, this horrific story had just happened where, oh, the shuttle blew up. Let's go watch this movie about the space shuttle. Oh, Ranter Matt, the AI Carlin thing. I watched some of it yesterday. I got through about 20 minutes of it and I had to stop. It was, yeah, I mean, you could tell that it was based on Carlin. Like it wasn't just completely out of left field. Like you could tell that it was inspired by Carlin and it mimicked his rhythm and his style to the point that it was recognizable, then that's what it was doing. But the material was just like, I mean, you know, it had Carlin's use of language. It wasn't sanitized. He would swear. He would say fucking shit and motherfucker and all that like the real Carlin would. And he would address like hot button topics like the real Carlin would. But the actual jokes and commentary, like it was toothless. It was white bread. It didn't have, because it's not from a person. It doesn't have an actual point of view. It doesn't have anything it really wants to say. There's no will behind it. There's no intention behind it. It's just kind of pointless, you know? So I watched some of it, but I turned it off after about 20 minutes. I was like, okay, I think I get it. You know, and there's no insight to be derived from this because it's not a real person doing it. It's just, it's a soulless act of mimicry. And in some ways, a very good act of mimicry or a very technically accomplished act of mimicry, but there's no heart to it. There's no soul to it. So what's the fucking point? You know, but yes, I did watch it. I did watch some of it. Wireless Mike with Carlin. Yeah, he did get dark at the end, and his material wasn't as sharp at the end as it had been, and I think his bitterness and his cynicism got the best of him in some ways. But he still, I mean, in his later years as a stand-up, Carlin, we're talking about, I mean, he still had some really great bits. Like there was a bit of his there was an album of his that was released posthumously just a few years ago. That he recorded around, I think, 2000. He recorded it right around when 9/11 happened. And that was the reason that he didn't release it at the time. He realized he thought that, you know, some of the nature of some of the material would be too sensitive or too inflammatory for people. So he decided not to release it. And I think a year or two later, he released a completely new album and special. But that material, which was some of his, you know, from the later portion of his career, I mean, there are some bits in that are still really funny. I mean, really funny. Not necessarily up with his greatest stuff ever, but still really, really funny. And his closing bit on that album, I like it, which I think was also, they took the name of the album from that. It's called I Like It When a Lot of People Die. I mean, it's absolutely jet black. Like, it is so dark, but it is fucking hilarious. So yes, I agree with you that his as he got older, some of his powers began to wane, but man, he was still capable of bringing it from time to time. And there's some of those later Carlin bits that are just fantastic. Oh, CMAX, Short Circuit on late seating. I would love to do Short Circuit. I don't know if we're ever going to do it, but I would love to do Short Circuit because you're right. There's a lot of stuff in it that is super cringe inducing, and would be fun to take apart and make fun of. But also, when I was a kid, god damn, I loved those movies. I loved Short Circuit, and I love Short Circuit 2. Like I saw Short Circuit 2 in a theater. I love Johnny Five. I loved that fucking movie. And yeah, obviously now the fucking Parker Stevens, his character, and doing the Indian accent is, oh man, what a bad idea. That really did not age well at all, and it was a bad idea at the time too. But we were less sensitive to these things. But yeah, I would love to do Short Circuit for late seating. I don't know if we ever will or not, but I would love to. Andrew Klein, what is my pick for best Carlin album? A lot of his stuff in the 90s was really good. I think the 90s for me was my favorite Carlin period. He did all those HBO specials. He did HBO specials throughout the 80s too, but You Are All Diseased is really good. I'm trying to think of what the other ones are. The one I remember the most is You Are All Diseased. I think that had some really, really sharp stuff in it. But I mean, take your pick. Like, so many good Carlin albums and specials. Isaiah asks, when I finish my Guy Bluford cosplay, do you want to see it? Yes, Guy Bluford, the first black astronaut. Yes, who flew in the space shuttle. I would love to see it. And okay, so it is now past 8:30. I am going to wrap the show up. I saw Geek sharing the links in the chat. Thank you very much for that, my friend. Don't forget charitylinks.page linked in the video description if you want to help out some friends of ours who need a helping hand. We really, really appreciate that if you're able to do that, and also make use of the specific links that were in the chat earlier from Geek. Fisher Stevens, yes, Fisher Stevens. Who was the Indian character in Short Circuit. Yeah, Fisher Stevens. Not Parker Stevens. Parker Stevens was on Baywatch. Fisher Stevens. Yeah, CMAC, please go harass Jason on Patreon to get Short Circuit, because I'm 100% on board with doing Short Circuit on late seating for sure. All right, so before I go, don't forget, if you want to support myself and my work on this channel, patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button here on YouTube to become a channel member. Either one of those for any amount of support per month, $1, $5, on up to whatever you can afford, whatever you think I'm worth, gets you access to all kinds of perks and benefits, including being able to submit questions ahead of time for these Ask Away live streams. Those are the questions I answer first from patrons and channel members. So if that is something you find interesting or compelling, please consider becoming a patron or a member. And I really, really appreciate all of you who are patrons and members. And I also appreciate those of you who sent in super chats tonight. Thank you so much, as always, for those. Also, don't forget, we've been talking about late seating the last few minutes. I'm a co-host on a couple of podcasts as a part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts, one of which is Late Seating, the movie review podcast, where Jason Harding and I take a fresh look at classic films and decide whether or not they deserve their reputation, be it good or bad. Our new episode that is out right now is our review of the classic Western Stagecoach, the movie that canonized that codified so many of the tropes that we associate with Western movies, that forged John Ford forever in our imaginations as the director of Westerns and made John Wayne a movie star. So whether you're happy about that or not, that's the reason why John Wayne was such a big movie star, because Stagecoach made him a star. So our review of Stagecoach is the new episode of Late Seating. And also there is the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed podcast that I do alongside Jason and Dana, who was with us earlier, but crawled off to bed because I was keeping her up too late. Sorry, Dana. Where Jason and Dana and I play characters serving aboard the TNG era Enterprise, and our stories kind of take place in the background of TNG episodes where the TNG crew from the show is somewhere doing their thing and we're in our own corner doing our own thing. And we have such a fun time doing the show. It's such a fulfilling thing for us to do, and we have so much fun making it. And hopefully, if you listen to it, you enjoy listening to it. And if you like Star Trek and you like funny Star Trek stuff and you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, check it out. See if it's your cup of tea. It's linked in the description. And if you do check it out, I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoy making it, because that's a lot. Thank you all so very much for being with me tonight. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. I will see you next week for a bunch of new videos. And of course, Dana and I will see you next week for a live stream on Wednesday night for our usual Trek Reluctantly stream starting Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, where we will be watching another episode of Agatha Christie's Poirot. So hopefully you can join us for that and watch Poirot along with us. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for all your support. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for hanging out with me in the chat. And I will see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.